Don't serve that biker. People like him don't belong here. The words hit the air like a slap, loud, deliberate, designed to humiliate. Every head in the restaurant turned. Some looked at the CEO. Most looked at the man in the leather vest standing near the entrance, dust on his boots, gray in his beard, a lifetime written across his face. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply turned toward the door. And then a 63-year-old waitress picked up a menu and walked straight toward him anyway. If this kind of story moves you, real people, real courage, real consequences, please subscribe to our channel and follow along all the way to the end. We release stories every week about ordinary people who do extraordinary things. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The lunch rush at Rosewood Diner had started to thin out the way it always did around 2 in the afternoon when the working people drifted back to their offices and the booths emptied out one by one. The staff moved through the quiet stretch with practiced ease, refilling salt shakers, wiping counters, resetting tables. Evelyn Parker had already been on her feet for 6 hours straight, and she still had 3 more to go, but she moved through her section without complaint. The way she always did, the way she had done for 27 years in this same building under this same roof. She was not a woman people wrote stories about. She was not someone who appeared in newspapers or received awards at community dinners. She was 63 years old, 5'4", with silver hair, and she kept pulled back because it stayed out of her face that way, and hands that showed every single year she had spent carrying plates and pouring coffee and listening to people talk about their problems. She wore the same white uniform she had worn for decades, kept it pressed and clean, because she believed that if you were going to do a job, you showed up for it completely. That was the kind of woman Evelyn Parker was. Not flashy, not loud, just steady and present and genuinely good in a way that was becoming harder and harder to find in the world. Her regular customers knew her by name. They knew she remembered how they took their coffee without being asked. Frank Delgado from the hardware store liked his black with 2 sugars. Mrs. Hartwell from the elementary school wanted hers with cream but no sweetener. And the young couple who came in every Saturday morning always got extra napkins before they even had to request them. Because Evelyn had learned in her first month serving them that they always needed extra napkins. That was her gift, not anything dramatic or extraordinary. Just attention, just care. Just the quiet, consistent decision to treat every single person who walked through that door like their comfort mattered. It was a gift she had inherited from her mother, who had also worked service her entire life and who had told Evelyn once when Evelyn was very young and complaining about a rude customer, "Baby, you are not serving their ego. You are serving their hunger. Don't ever confuse the two." Evelyn had never forgotten that. 27 years, thousands of customers, millions of small decisions to be kind when it would have been easier to be indifferent. That afternoon, she was refilling the sweet tea at table 7 when the front door opened. Heard it before she saw it, not the door, but the stillness that followed. The particular kind of silence that settles over a room when something unexpected enters it. The kind of silence that has a texture to it, thick and charged and waiting. She turned around. I was somewhere in his mid-50s, she guessed, though the road had a way of adding years to a person's face that made precise calculations difficult. He was solidly built, broad across the shoulders, with a gray beard trimmed close and eyes that moved carefully across the room without aggression. Just assessment, the practiced habit of a man who had learned long ago that it was better to understand a space before settling into it. His boots were worn leather, scuffed with real use. His jeans were clean but faded, and across the back of his black leather vest, stitched in careful detail, was the insignia of the Hells Angels. The room reacted the way rooms sometimes do to something unfamiliar. A few people looked away quickly. A couple leaned in toward each other and exchanged words too quiet to hear. One woman at the counter shifted her purse closer to her body, a small, instinctive gesture she probably wasn't even fully aware of making. The man in the leather vest appeared to notice none of it. Or perhaps he had simply seen it so many times that it no longer registered the way it once had. He walked toward an empty booth near the window with the measured, unhurried stride of someone who had learned not to perform his own comfort for other people's benefit. Evelyn watched him settle into the seat and pick up the laminated menu that was already sitting on the table. He held it the way people hold menus when they're genuinely hungry with purpose, scanning the pages seriously rather than casually. She was just beginning to think about walking over when she heard the voice. Adrian Blake's voice was the kind of voice that had been trained by decades of boardrooms and conference calls and the particular confidence that comes from never having been seriously challenged in a public setting. It was smooth and carrying and just loud enough to make sure it was heard by everyone in the room without quite becoming a shout. It was, Evelyn had always privately thought, the voice of a man who had confused volume with authority for so long that he could no longer tell the difference. Adrian Blake was the regional CEO of the Rosewood Diner chain. He appeared in the restaurants periodically on what he called quality assurance visits and what the staff called inspections, though his visits seemed to be more about reminding everyone who was ultimately in charge than about anything related to actual quality. He was in his mid-40s, expensively dressed, even in what he apparently considered casual attire, and he carried himself with the complete assurance of a man who had never encountered a situation he could not reshape to his advantage. He had arrived 20 minutes ago and had been sitting at the manager's booth near the back with a series of spreadsheets and a cup of coffee that had gone cold because he kept forgetting to drink it while he talked. When he stood up from that booth, Evelyn felt the energy in the room shift in a way she recognized. She had seen Adrian Blake stand up from that booth before, and it rarely produced anything good. He walked toward the front of the restaurant with his hands in his pockets and his chin at a particular angle that Evelyn had learned to associate with the decision already made. He stopped a few feet from the biker's table. "Excuse me." His voice was pleasant, the pleasantness of someone delivering bad news in a good tone because they enjoy the contrast. "We have a dress code here." The man in the leather vest looked up from the menu. His expression was patient. "Is that right?" It was not a question. "It is," Adrian said, "and I'm afraid you're—" He gestured vaguely at the vest, at the patches, at the man himself. "Your appearance doesn't meet our standards." The biker set the menu down on the table slowly. "I'm just looking for something to eat." "I understand that," Adrian said, "but this is a family restaurant. We have a responsibility to our other customers." "I haven't done anything." "I know you haven't, yet." Adrian let that word land where he intended it to. "But we prefer to maintain a certain atmosphere." He turned then, and his voice changed. It became louder, directional, designed to carry across the whole room. "Don't serve that biker." He said it clearly to no one specific and to everyone simultaneously. "People like him don't belong here." The words hit the room the way certain words do, with physical weight, a thing you felt in your chest before you processed it with your brain. Several customers flinched. A teenage boy at the counter turned to look at the biker with wide eyes. The line cook, visible through the kitchen window, stopped moving. The man in the leather vest sat very still for a moment. Then he picked up the menu, placed it back in its holder on the edge of the table with the same slow deliberateness with which he had set it down, and stood up. He had been dismissed so many times in so many places that the motion had become economy. No protest, no scene, just the quiet mechanics of departure. He was turning toward the door when Evelyn Parker picked up a menu and crossed the dining room floor. She didn't run. She didn't make a production of it. She simply walked with the same unhurried steadiness she brought to everything, the way a woman walks when she has made up her mind and is no longer weighing the decision. She reached his table before he reached the door. "Sir," her voice was warm and direct. "Please sit down." He stopped. She placed the menu on the table in front of the booth he had just vacated. Then she looked at him with a particular expression of a woman who has spent 27 years deciding 100 times a day what kind of person she was going to be. "You look like you haven't had a real meal in a while. Sit down, sweetheart. I'll get you some coffee." Behind her, she heard Adrian Blake's voice clip now, the pleasantness stripped away. "Evelyn." She did not turn around. "Evelyn, I gave a clear instruction." She pulled her order pad from her apron pocket. "Can I start you with coffee?" she asked the man. He was looking at her with an expression she would think about for a long time afterward. Something between surprise and something older, something that looked almost like recognition, like a man seeing something he had stopped expecting to find. "Yes," he said quietly. "Thank you." He sat back down. Evelyn turned around then and walked toward the coffee station, and she felt Adrian Blake's eyes on her back the whole way, and she felt the eyes of every customer in the room, and she understood with complete clarity what she had just done and what it was likely to cost her. She poured the coffee anyway. His name she learned when she brought to the coffee, and he wrapped both hands around the mug, like a man who had been Cole for a very long time was Cole. He didn't offer a last name and she didn't ask for one. That was one of the things she had learned in 27 years, that people tell you what they want you to know, and pushing past that rarely makes anyone more comfortable. He ordered the pot roast, which was the Tuesday special, and also Evelyn privately considered one of the best things the kitchen made. He said please when he ordered it and thank you when she brought it, and he ate with the focused attention of a man who had been genuinely hungry and was not embarrassed to admit it through the simple act of eating well. She checked on him twice. Each time he was polite and brief, not unfriendly, but not performing friendliness either, and she appreciated that. She had spent enough time around people who perform friendliness to know the difference between that and the real thing. At his third visit, she learned his last name was Harrison. At his fifth visit, she learned he took his coffee black. At his seventh visit, he told her unprompted that the pot roast reminded him of his grandmother's cooking, and he said it the way people say things that cost them something to say quietly and without looking up from his plate. She was the only person in my family who didn't make me feel like a problem, he said. Evelyn refilled his coffee. Well, she said she sounds like she was a smart woman. He looked up at her then and something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, just slightly. The way a door opens when someone finally finds the right key. She was, he said. She really was. Adrian Blake noticed. Of course he noticed. Adrian Blake made a point of noticing everything in his restaurants, particularly anything he had not approved, and particularly anything involving his direct instructions being disregarded. He had given a clear order publicly, and Evelyn Parker had walked straight through it as if it were made of smoke. That was not something Adrian Blake could allow to pass without response. He approached her during the mid-afternoon lull on the day of Cole's third visit, when the lunch crowd had cleared and the dinner prep hadn't yet begun, and he found her at the counter organizing condiment bottles with the methodical attention she gave everything. I want to talk to you about our biker friend, he said. Evelyn finished the bottle she was working on before responding. His name is Cole. I'm not interested in his name. Adrian's voice was controlled, but there was something beneath it, not quite anger, not yet, but the precondition of anger, the place where irritation lives before it decides what to become. I'm interested in why you continue to seat him after I made my position clear. He comes in, sits quietly, pays his bill, and leaves a good tip, Evelyn said. By my understanding, that makes him a customer. By my understanding, Adrian said, matching her tone precisely, employees of this company are expected to follow the directives of management. He hasn't done anything wrong. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She looked at him directly. She had a way of doing that, looking at a person directly without aggression, just with the quiet attention of someone who genuinely wanted to understand what they were saying and genuinely expected them to be able to explain it. It was apparently a quality that made Adrian Blake uncomfortable. He looked away first. The point, he said, is that certain customers affect the atmosphere of our establishment in ways that are difficult to quantify, but very easy to observe. We have a brand to protect. He's quiet and polite, and he tips better than most of the business lunch crowd, Evelyn said. I'm not sure what brand that's a problem for. The kind of people he associates with. I don't serve the people he associates with. I serve him. Evelyn, he paused, reset, started again with a different angle, softer now, the false softness of a man switching tactics. I understand you have a generous nature. I understand you want to help people. But there are realities to running a business that you may not fully appreciate from your position. She held his gaze. I appreciate, she said carefully, that 27 years of steady service and not one customer complaint is a position worth understanding. Adrian's jaw tightened. I'll expect you to follow company policy going forward, he said. This is not a conversation I want to have again. He left before she could respond, which she recognized as the move of a man who understood that he was not going to win the conversation and preferred to exit rather than lose it openly. She went back to her condiment bottles. But her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. The other staff watched all of this with the careful attention of people who have learned that the politics of a workplace can be unpredictable, and that surviving them requires knowing when to stay visible and when to disappear. Marcus, the line cook, who had been at Rosewood almost as long as Evelyn, watched Cole's weekly arrivals through the kitchen window and kept his thoughts close. Diane, who worked the counter and had 3 kids and a mortgage and could not afford to be on the wrong side of Adrian Blake's displeasure, smiled at Cole when he came in, but never offered him anything without Evelyn's explicit instigation. Tommy, who was 22 and had only been working there 6 months and still believed in instincts over caution, told Evelyn after Cole's fourth visit that he thought the whole thing was messed up. The guy hasn't done a single thing wrong, Tommy said, loading the dishwasher with more force than was strictly necessary. He just looks different from what Adrian wants the restaurant to look like. That's all this is. I know, Evelyn said, and you're the only one doing anything about it. Somebody has to. Tommy shook his head. Aren't you worried about what Blake's going to do? Evelyn was quiet for a moment, folding a dish towel with the automatic precision of long practice. I've been worried about plenty of things in my life, she said finally. My daughter when she was sick, my husband before he passed, whether my car was going to make it through another winter. What a man like Adrian Blake is going to do because I served somebody a cup of coffee that doesn't make the list. Tommy stared at her. Damn, he said quietly. Language, she said. Cole Harrison came back every Tuesday. He was not the kind of man who made himself easy to know. He spoke when he had something to say and was comfortable in the silences between which Evelyn appreciated because she had spent 27 years around people who were uncomfortable in silence and filled it with words that meant nothing. Cole's silence felt different, inhabited, not empty. He was present in it. She began to notice things about him, the way she noticed things about all her regulars through accumulation and attention. He drove a motorcycle that he parked carefully, never in a space that would block someone else. He read actual books, the physical kind, that he'd pull from the inside pocket of his vest and set on the table while he waited for his food. He had a way of looking at the room that was watchful without being threatening. The habitual awareness of a man accustomed to being in spaces where he needed to know what was happening around him. She noticed that other customers began to relax around him across successive weeks. The woman who had clutched her purse on his first visit eventually started saying good afternoon when he came in. The teenage boy who had stared with wide eyes started nodding at him like a regular person deserved to be nodded at. People adjusted when given enough time and enough evidence. Adrian Blake did not adjust. His visits to the restaurant became more frequent. He watched Cole's table with the particular attention of a man building a case, cataloging every small thing that could be shaped into evidence for a conclusion he had already decided to reach. He began interviewing other staff members when Evelyn was not in the room. She knew because Diane told her, eyes down, apologetic. He asked me to report to him if the biker causes any problems. I told him there haven't been any. He didn't look happy about that. You told him the truth, Evelyn said. That's all you can do. Evelyn, Diane stopped, started again. I'm not saying you're wrong. What you're doing, I'm not saying it's wrong. But he's the kind of man who, when he decides something, he doesn't let it go. You know that. I know. He's going to do something. I expect so. Diane looked at her for a long moment. Are you scared? She asked. Evelyn thought about her daughter working 2 jobs and still barely making rent since the layoff. She thought about her own savings account thin as paper. She thought about the fact that she was 63 years old and this restaurant was the primary source of her income and her health insurance and the structure that her days were built around. Then she thought about a man sitting down in a booth and asking for nothing more than a meal and being told by another man that people like him didn't belong here. Not scared enough, she said, Mom. What Cole Harrison did quietly in the weeks of those Tuesday visits, nobody knew about yet. Bonnie had noticed the struggling young family in the corner booth. On his 3rd week, 2 parents, 3 kids. One of the parents with the particular tight expression of a person counting the items on a menu against what they could afford. He said nothing about it. He ate his pot roast and paid his bill and left. But when Marcus came to clear his table, he found an envelope tucked under the edge of Cole's coffee mug. Inside was cash, enough to cover the young family's bill 3 times over, and a note that said, only put it toward their check. Don't tell them who. Marcus stood at that table for a long time. Then he walked to the kitchen and did not say a word about it to anyone for the rest of the day. 2 weeks later, Frank Delgado from the hardware store came in for his usual coffee and told Evelyn that the most extraordinary thing had happened. Some fellow he didn't know had come into the hardware store and spent an entire afternoon helping Frank work on a stuck hydraulic lift that had been giving him trouble for months. Wouldn't take a penny for his time, said he was just in the neighborhood. What did he look like? Evelyn asked. Frank described him. Evelyn poured Frank's coffee and said nothing and thought about quite a lot. The week after that, a woman came into the diner whom Evelyn didn't recognize, and she asked for Evelyn specifically. And when Evelyn came to her table, she said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I heard you were the woman who served Cole Harrison when that manager tried to turn him away. I just wanted to, I don't know. I wanted to meet you." She paused, turning her coffee cup in her hands. "My son was in a situation last year. Pretty bad situation. And Cole and some of his people, they stepped in. Without being asked. Without knowing us at all. My son is doing okay now. He's in school. She stopped. Her eyes were bright. "I just thought you should know who you gave a meal to." Evelyn reached across the table and covered the woman's hand with her own. She still didn't know the full truth of who Cole Harrison was, but she was beginning to understand the shape of it. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the ninth week of Cole's visits, when the restaurant was between crowds, and Evelyn had a rare 10 minutes of genuine stillness. She brought him his coffee without being asked and sat down across from him, which she had never done before, and he looked at her with an expression of mild surprise. "I'm going to take 5 minutes if that's all right," she said. "More than all right." She folded her hands on the table. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "You can ask," he said. "I'll answer if I can." "Why do you keep coming back?" She held his gaze. "You know the trouble it causes. You know that man doesn't want you here. You could find a dozen other places for pot roast. Why here?" Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his coffee cup, and there was something in his expression that Evelyn recognized, the particular look of a person deciding how much truth to offer. "First time I came in," he said slowly. "I'd been driving for about 11 hours. He paused. "I was coming from a funeral, one of my oldest friends, and I stopped because I was tired and I needed food, and I thought I'd just eat and be on my way." He looked up, and then that man said what he said, and I turned around to leave, because that's what you do. You don't make scenes in other people's spaces. You just leave. He wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "And then you came across that floor with a menu." He let that sit there between them. "I've been in a lot of places," he said quietly. "Done a lot of things, built things, fought for things, lost things. And I've had people help me and people turn me away and everything in between. And somewhere along the way," he stopped, shook his head slightly. "You stop expecting it. The kindness. You're not bitter about it. You just stop expecting it." Evelyn didn't say anything. "You brought me a menu," he said, "in front of everyone in this room after a man with all the authority in this building had just made it very clear I wasn't welcome. You brought me a menu and you called me sweetheart and you asked me how I took my coffee." He looked at her. "I come back every Tuesday because I'm not ready to let go of the reminder that that happens, that people like you exist and are still out here doing that." Evelyn Parker sat across from Cole Harrison in the Rosewood Diner, where she had worked for 27 years, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatically, not with any fanfare, but with the solid, permanent feeling of something true settling into place. "Well," she said when she could trust her voice again, "Tuesday pot roast isn't going anywhere, so I suppose we'll see you next week." The corner of his mouth moved. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "You will." She didn't see Adrian watching from the back of the room. She didn't see the way his expression had changed, moving through several stages before arriving at something cold and deliberate. She didn't know that he had already made up his mind, but she should have, because Adrian Blake was a man who had built everything he had on the principle that authority once challenged must be restored at any cost. And Evelyn Parker had just given him exactly the scene he needed. She had sat down at a table with a customer. She had treated a biker like a human being worth her time. She had done it in front of his restaurant, in front of his staff, on what he had already decided to make his hill. In his mind, the case was already closed. All that remained was the execution. And Adrian Blake, whatever else could be said about him, had never in his life hesitated to execute. The Tuesday after that conversation, Evelyn arrived at work 30 minutes early. She told herself it was habit. She had always been early. 27 years of early mornings had made it instinct, the body knowing before the mind did that the day needed to be met before it arrived rather than after. But if she was being honest with herself, and Evelyn Parker had made honesty a personal policy long before it became fashionable, she knew the real reason. She wanted to be there before Adrian Blake. She wanted to have her section set, her coffee station ready, her day organized and in motion before he showed up, because a moving target is harder to aim at than a stationary one. And she had the distinct feeling that she had become a target. The restaurant was quiet when she came in. Marcus was already in the kitchen, the sound of prep work, the rhythmic thud of a knife against a cutting board, the hiss of the flat top warming up coming through the pass-through window like a familiar morning language. He looked up when she came through the back door and said nothing, which was how Marcus communicated most things. But his eyes held something. She recognized it as the look of a man who had heard something he didn't want to tell her. "What?" she said. "Good morning to you too," Marcus said, not stopping his work. Marcus, he set the knife down, turned to face her, crossed his arms. "He was here last night," he said, after close. "Him and his assistant going through files in the office. I was finishing up the deep clean and they didn't see me back there." He paused. "They were talking about you." Evelyn draped her coat over the hook by the back door and reached for her apron. "What were they saying?" "Something about documentation. Building a file." His exact words were. Marcus glanced away as if deciding whether to repeat it, then looked back. "If she won't follow direction, I need to be able to demonstrate a pattern of insubordination." He watched her face. "You know what that means." "It means he's going to fire me," Evelyn said. She said it plainly without drama, the way a person states a weather forecast. "And he's going to do it carefully enough that it doesn't look like retaliation." "Evelyn, it's all right, Marcus." "It is absolutely not all right." His voice had an edge in it she hadn't heard before, something hot and controlled at the same time. "You've been here 27 years. You have never not once had a complaint. Your tables turn better than anyone on the floor. Customers ask for you by name. He can't just, he can," she said quietly. "He's the CEO and this is his company. And if he decides he has documentation showing that I repeatedly failed to follow management directives, then legally and practically, he can do exactly what he's planning to do." She tied her apron strings with steady hands. "What I need to decide is what I'm going to do about it." "Which is what?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "The same thing I've been doing," she said. "My job correctly, with kindness, and let him do what he's going to do." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. "You are either the bravest person I know," he said, "or the most stubborn." "My late husband would have said both, and that they're the same thing," she replied and went to open the front for the morning crowd. She didn't have to wait long to understand what building a file looked like in practice. It started the following week, small enough to seem like nothing if you weren't looking for it. Her section was changed slightly officially in a way that could be explained as routine rotation, and she was moved away from the window booths where Cole always sat. The new configuration put his preferred table in Diane's section. Diane found Evelyn in the break room before the Tuesday shift and looked at her with the expression of someone carrying something they didn't ask to carry. "He told me that if the biker sits in my section, I'm not supposed to seat him," Diane said. "If he comes in and asks for the window booth, I'm supposed to tell him it's reserved." Evelyn looked at her. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I understood." Diane's jaw was tight. "I've got 3 kids, Evelyn. I've got a car payment and a mortgage and Tommy's school fees, and I cannot—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm not like you. I can't afford to be like you." "I know," Evelyn said, and she meant it without any edge in it. "I'm not asking you to be. But you're not going to stop." "No," Diane exhaled. "Then you should know something else. He started keeping a written log. Every time you serve Cole, which booth, how long, whether you initiated contact or waited for Cole to request you specifically. His assistant takes notes." She looked at the floor. "I've seen it." Evelyn absorbed this. "He's documenting it as a pattern," she said almost to herself. "He's going to say I've been creating an environment where a disruptive patron feels repeatedly welcomed against management instruction." She understood the architecture of it now, how each Tuesday was a brick in the wall Adrian was building around her. "How long has the log been going?" "Since his 3rd visit," Diane said. Evelyn did the math quickly. That was 7 weeks of documentation. 7 written records of her choosing Cole Harrison over Adrian Blake's directive. Any labor attorney would tell her that was a serious problem. Any person with her bills would tell her that was a catastrophic problem. But she thought about Cole's voice saying, "You have brought me a menu in front of everyone in this room," and something in her simply would not move. "Thank you for telling me," she said to Diane. "Seriously, I wish I could do more. You're doing plenty. You're doing what you can afford to do. That's not nothing. Diane nodded, not looking entirely comforted, and went back to the floor. Evelyn sat alone in the break room for another moment, her hands flat on the table, feeling the weight of what she was carrying, not just her own situation, but the weight of being the person in the room who had to hold the line when nobody else could afford to hold it with her. She had not chosen this. She had simply walked across a dining room floor with a menu, and somehow that single walk had become the thing that everything else was attached to now, the load-bearing moment from which a dozen other moments hung. She got up and went back to work. Cole arrived at 12:43, the same as he always did. He came through the front door and moved toward the window booth, and Diane was already at the table, her posture carrying the discomfort of a person about to do something she didn't want to do. Evelyn watched from across the room, stacking clean plates with her back half turned, not looking directly. She heard Diane say something, heard Cole respond. The exchange was brief. Then Cole turned away from the window booth. He looked across the room and found Evelyn. He walked toward her section and sat down at a table in her zone, not the window booth, but a table near the back wall. And when she came over with coffee, he looked up at her with an expression that was both wry and something else, something quieter, behind the wryness, reading the room exactly as accurately as she had suspected he always did. Booth was reserved, he said. Apparently so, she said, pouring his coffee. Funny, he said. I've never seen it reserved before. Things change. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the coffee cup. He looked at her. Evelyn, he said. Don't, she said. Please. I just want to. I know what you want to say, she said, and her voice was gentle but firm, the voice she used with customers who were headed somewhere she didn't want them to go. You want to tell me this isn't worth it, that I should be careful, that you can eat somewhere else. She looked at him directly. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I would have told you the very first day if you'd tried to talk me out of it. You came in here looking for a meal. You were polite and you had your money and you hadn't done a single thing wrong. And a man decided you weren't welcome because of how you looked. I served you then because it was the right thing to do. Nothing about that has changed. Cole looked at her for a long time. You're going to lose your job over this, he said quietly. It was not a question. Maybe, she said, but I'm not going to lose myself over it. She pulled out her order pad. Pot roast. Something moved across his face, something she couldn't quite name, something that lived between admiration and anguish, and something older than either. Yes, he said, thank you. She wrote it down and walked to the kitchen. Behind her at the manager's station near the back, she heard the particular sound of a pen moving across a notepad. She did not look back. Her daughter called that night. Rachel Parker was 38 sharp and resilient and struggling in the particular way that a resilient person struggles quietly from the inside without wanting to burden the people she loved. She had lost her position at the marketing firm 4 months earlier when the company restructured, and she had been patching things together with freelance work in a part-time position that paid less than her rent, and Evelyn knew, because she knew her daughter, the way mothers know their children, that Rachel was closer to the edge than she admitted. How was work? Rachel asked in the tone that meant she was asking about Evelyn's day, so she didn't have to talk about her own. Work was work, Evelyn said. How are you holding up? A pause. The particular kind of pause that contains an entire conversation that neither person is quite ready to have yet. I'm fine, Rachel said. Rachel, Mom, I'm fine. Your Aunt Deborah used to say I'm fine every single Sunday for 3 years. And then one day the whole situation came out at once, at Easter dinner, and the turkey was still warm, Evelyn said. I would like to avoid that. Rachel laughed the real kind, not the reassuring kind, and Evelyn felt some of the tension in her own chest loosen slightly. I got another rejection today, Rachel said, then softer. The position I really wanted, in the marketing department at Green & Associates. A beat. They went with someone younger. They say that they didn't have to. Evelyn closed her eyes. She was sitting at her kitchen table in the house she had owned for 31 years, the house where she had raised Rachel, where she had sat at this same table and tried to figure out how to pay for college on a waitress's salary and had somehow managed it. She was thinking about her own situation at work, about the file Adrian Blake was building, about the conversation she'd had with Marcus that morning, and she was performing a rapid and unhappy calculation in her mind. If she lost her job, she could not continue helping Rachel. If she stopped serving coal to protect her job, she would have made the calculation that her comfort was worth more than someone else's dignity. Neither option was acceptable. She had not yet found the third path. Listen to me, she said to Rachel. You are not too old. You are experienced. There's a difference, and the right employer is going to understand that difference. She paused. And whatever you need from me right now, you have it. Okay, whatever you need. Mom, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. That's different. Another pause. Are you okay? Rachel asked, and it was a different question than the one she'd asked at the beginning of the call. It was sharper, more specific. It was the question of a daughter who knew her mother. I'm handling something at work, Evelyn said carefully. Nothing you need to worry about. Mom, Rachel, I've been handling things since before you were born. I'll handle this too. But after she hung up sitting alone in the kitchen, she did not feel entirely certain of that. For the first time since she had walked across the dining room floor with that menu, she sat with the possibility that she had miscalculated. Not the rightness of it, she was certain, bone-deep certain about the rightness of it, but the cost, the real full cost, not just to herself but to her daughter, who needed her to be employed and insured and stable for however long the rough patch lasted. She sat with that for a long time. Then she got up, made herself a cup of tea, and thought very carefully. The following Tuesday, she arrived early again. She did not know that something had shifted in the week between visits, that the world around the Rosewood Diner had been quietly rearranged in ways she couldn't see yet. She didn't know that two of the regular customers who had watched her serve coal on that first day, Frank Delgado and a retired teacher named Harriet Bloom, who came in every morning for breakfast, had been talking to each other about what they'd observed. She didn't know that what began as a conversation between two people over coffee had quietly expanded the way conversations do in small communities where people still know their neighbors, until it had become a topic at a table of four, and then a table of six, and then a subject that people were discussing at their kitchen tables at home and in the parking lot after church. She didn't know that someone had filmed a portion of the first incident, Adrian's public declaration, her crossing the room with the menu, on a cell phone, and that the video had been shared within a local community group online, and that the comments numbered in the hundreds. She didn't know any of that. She found out in pieces the way you find out about things that have been happening without you. It started with Frank. He came in that Tuesday morning at his usual time and sat at his usual stool and waited for his usual coffee. And when Evelyn brought it, he looked at her with an expression so serious and warm at the same time that she stopped. What? She said. People are talking about you, Frank said. Frank, not bad talking, good talking. He wrapped his hands around the mug. That video of the first day, the one where Blake told the whole restaurant not to serve that fella, and you just walked right over there anyway. He looked at her. It's got a couple thousand views, Evelyn. In the local groups, they're responding to it. A lot of people. Evelyn set the coffee pot down. She sat on the stool next to Frank's. She never did that, not during a shift, but her legs had decided to do it before her brain caught up. What are people saying? She voice was careful. Frank pulled out his phone, not a thing he did easily or naturally. He was 72 and treated the device with the suspicious respect of a man who had been told it was useful without being convinced. And he read from the screen, "This woman is a hero. I've eaten at that place for years. I'm not going back until that manager is gone." Another one. The biker is Cole Harrison. Google him. He runs 2 food drives a year, organized a shelter build last winter, and has never once been in any trouble. That CEO needs to answer for this. And then Frank paused reading. I watched that CEO turn someone away from a table because he didn't like what he was wearing. That's not a brand issue, that's a prejudice issue. And that old waitress is the only person in that room with any actual character. Evelyn was very quiet. Frank looked at her. Old waitress, she said. Frank snorted. I told you people are clumsy with their compliments. 2,000 views, she said, still processing. As of this morning. Could be more by now. He put his phone away. The point is, you're not in this alone. You may have felt like you were, but you're not. People saw what you did. People are paying attention. She thought about what he said for the rest of the morning. You're not in this alone. The words were both comforting and terrifying because attention, the kind that lives on the internet, the kind that spreads, was a thing that moved in directions you couldn't predict. and she had spent 63 years being a private person in a small-scale life, and she was not at all sure how she felt about suddenly being a thing that thousands of strangers had opinions about. She was still thinking about it when Cole came in at 12:43. He sat in her section again. He took his coffee, black again. He ordered the pot roast. And then he looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. "I owe you an explanation," he said. She looked at him. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet she heard him deciding something hurt it the way you hear a gear shift, the particular internal sound of a decision being made. "You've been defending me for weeks without knowing who I actually am. That's not fair to you, especially now." "Especially now," she repeated. "What does that mean?" He met her eyes. "You're going to start hearing things about me," he said, "about who I'm connected to, about the club. Some of it's going to sound—" He stopped, chose his words. "Not everyone is going to frame what they know about me the way your friend Frank did this morning." Her eyes sharpened. "You know about the video." "I know about a lot of things," he said simply. "That's part of what I want to explain." He leaned forward slightly, his forearms on the table, his voice dropping into the register of someone speaking the truth without decorating it. "My name is Cole Harrison. I've been the chapter president of the local Hells Angels for 11 years. Before that, I spent 16 years working my way up through the club after getting out of a situation as a young man that could have gone very differently if one person hadn't stepped in to help me when they didn't have any reason to. I know what that kind of help costs the person who gives it. I know exactly what it costs." He held her gaze. "I have two businesses, a motorcycle repair shop and a logistics company, both legitimate, both profitable. I have a team of lawyers who have looked at every aspect of both operations more times than I can count. I have never been convicted of anything. I have never been charged with anything. What I have is a record of association, which means that because of the organization I belong to, certain people will assume certain things regardless of the evidence." Evelyn listened to all of this without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. He blinked. "You know?" "Not the specific details, but the shape of it." She folded her hands on the table. "Cole, I've spent 27 years watching people make assumptions based on appearance. I knew what I was doing when I crossed that room. I didn't need your resume to do it." Something shifted in his expression. The careful composure of a man who had spent years maintaining it, loosening slightly just at the edges, just enough to show what was underneath. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "Adrian Blake doesn't just run this restaurant chain," Cole said. "He sits on the board of 3 other companies in this region. He has connections in the city planning office, in the local business association, and a number of places that give him leverage beyond what his title here reflects." He paused. "He is also based on things I have observed and things that have been brought to my attention by people I trust. Someone with a pattern of behavior toward employees that goes well beyond what he's shown you." The air between them changed. "What kind of behavior?" Evelyn asked quietly. "The kind that requires documentation," Cole said, "and patience, and someone who knows how to use what they find." His eyes were steady on hers. "I'm not telling you this so you'll do anything different. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the whole picture." Evelyn Parker sat across the table from Cole Harrison and understood in that moment that the universe had arranged something that neither of them had asked for, and both of them in different ways had been moving toward without knowing it. She had not walked across that dining room floor to change anything. She had simply seen a person being treated unjustly and had done the only thing she knew how to do. But that one moment, that single crossing of a room, had set something in motion that she was only now beginning to see the edges of. "Cole," she said carefully. "Yes." "What exactly are you planning to do?" He looked at her, not like a man who had a simple answer, like a man who had a complete answer and was deciding how much of it to give her. "What's necessary," he said, "and what's right, in that order." Before she could respond, she heard a voice behind her. Evelyn, Adrian Blake's voice was smooth and cold in equal measure. "My office, now please. I believe we have something important to discuss." She did not look at Cole, but she felt him go very still across the table. And she understood, without anyone having to say it, that Adrian Blake had seen the conversation, and that whatever he had decided to do, he had decided to do it today. She stood up from the table. She folded her order pad into her apron. She She looked at Adrian Blake and said with complete composure, "Of course," and she followed him. Cole and her go his expression, unreadable to anyone who didn't know how to look. But his hands flat on the table in front of him were very, very still. The stillness of a man who had already made every calculation that needed to be made and was simply waiting for the right moment to act. The office was small and smelled of the cedar air freshener. Adrian's assistant always placed in the corners of rooms he occupied regularly. His assistant, a young woman named Kelly, who had the practiced blankness of someone who had learned to process everything she witnessed and show none of it, was already there when they arrived, seated to the side with a notepad open. Evelyn sat in the chair across from Adrian's desk without being invited to. Adrian sat. He opened the folder that was already waiting on the desk. She noticed that the deliberateness of having it ready, this performance of preparation, and he folded his hands on top of it. "I want to talk to you about your conduct," he said. "All right," she said. "Over the past 9 weeks, I have observed and documented 11 separate instances in which you continued to serve a patron against clear management directive. I have also documented this morning's incident in which you left your position during active service hours to sit with that patron at his table. I was on my break," she said, "and I was at the table for 7 minutes. That's not the point." "What is the point, Adrian?" He looked at her, the look of a man not accustomed to being addressed by his first name by someone in her position and not pleased about it. "The point," he said, "is that you have repeatedly and deliberately undermined management authority. You have created a situation in which a staff member has effectively made a unilateral decision about customer policy. And you have done so while apparently becoming the subject of a viral internet video that now associates this restaurant chain with a public controversy I did not sanction and cannot control." His voice was controlled. "That is a terminable pattern of behavior." Evelyn looked at the folder. "You've been building this file for 9 weeks, she said. "Yes. Before I missed a single shift, before I received a single customer complaint, before I did anything except serve a man who sat quietly, paid his bill, and treated everyone in this restaurant with more basic courtesy than you showed him on the day he walked in." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Evelyn, I have worked in this restaurant for 27 years, she said. Her voice was measured and clear. "I have never been written up. I have never had a complaint. I have covered shifts when nobody else would. You have trained staff you hired. I have kept tables through the hardest periods this place has had. And you have spent 9 weeks building a file to remove me because I gave a human being a cup of coffee." She looked at him. "I want you to understand that I understand exactly what this is." "What it is," Adrian said, "is a business decision." "No," she said, "it's a personal decision dressed in business language. There's a difference. And I think if you are honest with yourself in a quiet moment, you know that." Adrian opened the folder. "Effective at the end of this week," he said. "Your position here is terminated. You will receive 2 weeks severance as provided by your employment agreement and a neutral reference upon request." He pushed a single sheet across the desk. "This is your separation notice." Evelyn looked at the paper. She picked it up. She read it because she was a thorough person and she believed in knowing exactly what she was dealing with. Then she set it back down. "All right," she said. Adrian blinked. He had been prepared for protest, for tears, for the particular desperate negotiation of a person facing financial threat. He was not prepared for calm. "All right," he repeated. "All right," she said again. "I'll finish the week." She stood up. She straightened her apron. At the door, she paused and turned back. "Adrian," she said, "I've watched a lot of people come through this restaurant over the years. People in hard times, people who were scared, people who just needed somewhere safe to sit for an hour and be treated like they mattered." She held his gaze. "When you spend your life giving that to people, you learn to recognize when something is genuinely wrong. Not inconvenient, not challenging, but genuinely fundamentally wrong." A pause. "What you did to Cole Harrison on that first day was wrong. And what you've spent 9 weeks doing to me is wrong. And the difference between you and me isn't authority or salary or job title." She met his eyes one final time. "It's that I can look at myself in the mirror." She went back to the floor. She picked up her coffee pot. She went to table 3 and refilled Frank Delgado's cup without spilling a drop. Her hands were perfectly steady. She did not go back to Cole's table. But she heard him stand up and leave shortly after, and she heard very clearly in the afternoon quiet of the restaurant The sound of his boots on the floor deliberate, unhurried, and the sound of the door opening and closing behind him. And she stood at the counter and breathed, and held what she was feeling, and let it be exactly as big as it was and no bigger, because she had a week left, and she was going to spend every minute of it doing her job exactly right. Whatever came after that, she would face it, the same way she had always faced everything, one step at a time, starting with the next table. She finished that Tuesday shift the way she finished every shift, section wiped down, salt shakers topped off, chairs pushed in, straight coffee pot cleaned and set for the morning. The rituals of 27 years. Her hands moved through them automatically while her mind moved somewhere else entirely, turning over the afternoon's events the way you turn over a stone to see what's living underneath it. Adrian Blake had fired her, formally, with a folder and a separation notice, and a young woman taking notes in the corner of the room. He had done it cleanly, legally, in the way of a man who had planned it carefully enough that there were no loose edges for anyone to grab onto. She had told him she would finish the week. She had meant it. What she had not told him, what she was only beginning to understand herself, standing at the counter cleaning a coffee pot she would not be using much longer, was that she was not afraid. She had expected to be afraid. She had sat in that chair across from Adrian's desk and waited for the fear to arrive, the specific cold fear of a 63-year-old woman facing unemployment, and it hadn't come. Something else had come instead. Something quieter and more solid, like a foundation settling after a long time of being tested. She was angry, cleanly, clearly, righteously angry, but she was not afraid. She drove home in the dark and called Rachel and told her nothing about it because there was nothing to tell, yet that wouldn't make Rachel panic before Evelyn had a plan. She ate a bowl of soup and sat at the kitchen table and let herself think for one full, uninterrupted hour about what the next step was. At the end of that hour, she did not have an answer, but she had a direction, and sometimes that's enough to start. Wednesday morning came with the particular quality of light that means nothing except that time continues, regardless of what happened to you the day before. Evelyn arrived at Rosewood Diner at 6:45, 30 minutes ahead of her shift, and found Marcus already in the kitchen as usual. He took one look at her face and put down what he was doing. "He did it," Marcus said. "End of the week," she said. Marcus said a word that Evelyn would normally have corrected him for. She let it pass. "I'm going to HR," he said. "Marcus, I have documentation of my own. Things I've seen, employees he's talked down to in front of customers. A young woman who quit last year because of how he spoke to her. I kept notes." He said it with the quiet certainty of a man who had known somewhere in the back of his mind that this day was coming and had prepared for it the way careful people prepare for things they hope won't happen. "I've been keeping them for 2 years. I never thought I'd need them this fast." Evelyn stared at him. "2 years," she said. "He's always been this way," Marcus said. "You just became the one who made it impossible to ignore." She sat down on the stool by the prep counter, the one she'd perched on hundreds of times over the years, waiting for the kitchen to confirm a special or to steal a 5-minute break between rushes. She sat down on it now and felt the weight of what Marcus had just said settle into her. She had not been the beginning of this. She had just been the moment it became visible. "There's something you need to know," Marcus said. He pulled his phone from his apron pocket and held it toward her. On the screen was a social media post from the local community group, the same one Frank had mentioned. The video had now been viewed 14,000 times. 14,000. She read the comments for the first time herself, sitting in the kitchen, before the morning rush began, and it was a different experience than hearing Frank describe them. There was something visceral about seeing them directly, hundreds of individual voices, people she had never met, from places she had never been, reacting to 30 seconds of footage of her crossing a dining room floor with a menu. Some comments were from people who had eaten at Rosewood Diner and recognized her. Some were from people who had experienced something similar, turned away from somewhere, treated as less than watched while others looked away. Some were from people who had heard of Cole Harrison, who left comments that said things like, "That man builds houses for people who have nowhere to go, and Cole Harrison has fed more people in this city than that CEO ever will. And do your homework before you judge a man by his jacket." And underneath all of those, threaded through hundreds of responses, was one question that appeared again and again in different forms. "Is she okay? What happened to her?" Did they fire her? People were asking about her. Not about the biker, not about the CEO, not about the restaurant, about her specifically, about whether the old waitress was all right. She handed the phone back to Marcus. 14,000 people, she said. Could be 20 by tonight, he said. She thought about that for a moment. Marcus, she said, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Keep working. Don't do anything with those notes yet. Don't go to HR, not today. She looked at him. I need a few days. I think something is happening, and I don't fully understand the shape of it yet, and I don't want to move before I understand it. Marcus studied her face. You know something, he said, or you think you know something. I think Cole Harrison is not finished, she said quietly, and I think whatever he's planning is going to require me to be patient and trust something I can't entirely see yet. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. All right, he said finally, a few days. He picked up his knife and went back to his prep work. But not forever. Not forever, she agreed, just long enough. She did not have to wait as long as she thought. Cole came in that Wednesday, not Tuesday, not his usual day, which was the first signal that something had shifted in his own thinking. He came in just after 2 in the afternoon during the slow stretch, and he didn't sit down in her section. He sat at the counter, which he had never done before, and he waited until she came over with the coffee pot. She poured without being asked. He turned the cup in his hands and looked at it for a moment. Then he said, without preamble, he formally terminated you yesterday. Yes. End of the week. Yes. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything, he said. He looked up at her. Can you do that? She put the coffee pot down and leaned against the counter. I'm listening. He spoke quietly the way he always did, but there was a different quality to it now. Something more deliberate, each sentence placed with the care of a man who has thought about the order of them. I told you last week that Adrian Blake has a pattern, he said. What I didn't tell you is how I know that. For the past 3 months before any of this started with you and me, one of my business contacts brought a situation to my attention. A former employee of this restaurant chain, not this location, a different one, who was terminated after she filed a complaint against Blake for creating a hostile working environment. She was offered a settlement with a non-disclosure clause. She took it because she had no other option. He paused. She's not the only one. There are 2 others I know of. Different circumstances, same pattern. He finds the person in the room who challenges his authority. He constructs a documentation file, and he removes them cleanly enough that they have no legal recourse. He met her eyes. He's done this before. You're not his first. Evelyn felt something cold move through her, and then something hot right behind it. 3 people, she said, that I know of. There may be more. And they all signed NDAs. Yes, she processed this. So they can't speak publicly. They can't corroborate each other. Not directly. But the pattern is documentable through other means. Employment records, timing of terminations relative to complaint filings, the structure of the settlements themselves. He paused again. I have a lawyer, a very good one, someone who specializes in exactly this kind of situation. She's been looking at what I've gathered for the past 6 weeks. Evelyn stared at him. 6 weeks, she said. You've been doing this for 6 weeks. Since the 3rd Tuesday, he said, since I understood what kind of man he was and what he was going to do. He held her gaze steadily. I should have told you sooner. I didn't because I wasn't certain how far it would go, and I didn't want to give you something to hold on to that might not pan out. But it's panning out. What does that mean? It means my lawyer believes there is enough to bring a complaint to the State Labor Board and potentially to pursue civil action on behalf of multiple former employees, he said. It means that in the next 72 hours, I need to decide whether to move forward. And before I do that, I needed to sit across from you and tell you all of it. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm the current one, she said. I'm the active case. Because you're the one who started this, he said, without knowing that's what you were doing. And that matters. It matters to me. He looked at her steadily. I'm not going to move on any of this without your consent. You have a right to know what you're stepping into if this goes forward. It's going to get loud. It's going to get public. He's going to push back hard, and he has resources. And the 14,000 people watching a video of me crossing a dining room floor, she said quietly. Something moved across Cole's face that might in a different person have been called a smile. Those 2, he said, though numbers on a screen have a way of dispersing when things get uncomfortable, I wouldn't count on strangers. I'm not counting on strangers, she said. I'm counting on what's right. She looked at him. Cole, you've been gathering this information for 6 weeks. You have a lawyer, you have documentation, and you came here on a Wednesday, not your day, to sit at the counter instead of a booth, so we could have a conversation without him seeing us face each other across a table. She paused. How serious is this? Serious, he said. How serious is serious? He held her gaze. Serious enough that if it goes the way my lawyer thinks it can go, Adrian Blake loses more than the ability to fire people quietly, he said. Serious enough that the board of this company is going to have to make some decisions they are not going to enjoy making. He paused. Serious enough that you should talk to someone you trust before you decide whether you're in. I trust you, she said, and she said it without ceremony, the way she stated facts, and she watched it land on him with more weight than she had intended. He was quiet for a moment. Evelyn, he said, you don't know me well enough to. I know that you came back 11 Tuesdays in a row to a restaurant where the management didn't want you and you never once made a scene or caused a problem or did anything except eat quietly and tip well and help people without being asked. She said, I know that a woman I've never met came into this diner to tell me her son was saved from a bad situation because of you. I know you've been spending 6 weeks building a case to protect employees you don't know because it's the right thing to do. She picked up the coffee pot. I know what I need to know. He looked at the counter, then he looked up. All right, he said, then here's what comes next. What came next moved faster than Evelyn had anticipated. She had thought when Cole described it in the measured tones of a man accustomed to waiting, that there would be days or weeks of careful legal positioning before anything visible happened. She had thought she would finish her week, collect her severance, and wait while machinery she couldn't see operated in rooms she wouldn't be in. She was wrong about the timeline. Thursday morning, she arrived at Rosewood Diner to find Adrian Blake already there earlier than usual, his posture carrying the particular rigidity of a man who has received unexpected news and is working to contain his reaction to it. Kelly was beside him with her tablet, and they were speaking in the low, urgent tones of people who don't want to be overheard. Marcus caught Evelyn's eye across the kitchen pass-through and gave her a look that said something happened. She went through her morning routine, set her section, started her side work, said good morning to the 3 customers who came in for early coffee, watched. At 8:45, Adrian approached her. Evelyn, he said. His voice had a different quality than it had in the office on Tuesday, less controlled, more clipped. Did you speak with anyone yesterday about the terms of your separation? I spoke with several people, she said. I talk to people. It's what I do. About the terms, he said, his eyes were direct and something behind them was not quite steady. About the specifics, the timeline, the severance package, the documentation. She looked at him. Why are you asking me that? Because this morning I received a contact from an attorney representing a coalition of former employees of this company, he said, and his voice was very controlled now, in the way that a thing is controlled when it requires significant effort to keep it that way. Making certain inquiries about the circumstances of several employee terminations over the past 4 years, including yours. He paused. I'm asking whether you initiated that contact. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Am I being accused of something, she asked. I'm asking a direct question. And I'm asking one back, she said. If there are legal matters to discuss, I would think you'd want to have that conversation with a lawyer present rather than with me while I'm holding a coffee pot. Adrian's jaw tightened. Have a good morning, she said, and she turned and went to table 2 where Frank Delgado had just sat down. She heard Adrian walk away behind her. She heard the particular sound of a man making a phone call the moment he was out of the dining room. Frank looked at her with bright eyes. What was that about, he said. Good morning, Frank, she said. Coffee? Don't good morning, Frank, me. I've been watching you handle that man for months. Something's happening. She poured his coffee. Something's happening, she agreed. Good something or bad something. She thought about it for a genuine moment. I think, she said carefully, that it depends very much on which side of the table you're sitting on. Cole's lawyer was named Patricia Reyes, and she arrived at the diner on Thursday afternoon with the contained, purposeful energy of a person who does not waste motion. Evelyn had been told to expect her. She had not been told what she looked like. And so when a woman in her early 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a briefcase that had seen significant use sat down in Evelyn's section, and ordered coffee without picking up a menu. Evelyn took one look at her and knew. She brought the coffee. She sat down across from her during a quiet moment between tables. Patricia Reyes did not open with small talk. Cole has told me a great deal about you, she said. I want to hear your version directly. What happened in what order and what you observed? Take your time, be specific, Evelyn told her. All of it, starting from the moment Adrian had spoken those words in the middle of the lunch crowd. Don't serve that biker, people like him, don't belong here, and moving forward through every Tuesday, every conversation with Marcus, every exchange with Diane, every note she'd seen Kelly taking every word of the conversation in Adrian's office on Tuesday afternoon. She spoke for 22 minutes without stopping. Patricia Reyes wrote in a small notebook and did not interrupt once. When Evelyn finished, Patricia looked up from her notes. You said he had a folder already prepared when you came into the office. Yes, pre-labeled. I didn't see a label from where I was sitting, but it was prepared, present on the desk before you arrived. Before I arrived, Evelyn confirmed. Kelly was already in the room with her notepad. Patricia made a note. And the section reassignment moving you away from Cole's preferred table. Was that communicated in writing? No, verbally, from the scheduling manager. Was the scheduling manager acting on Blake's instruction? That's my understanding, yes. Diane confirmed it. Can Diane confirm it in writing? Evelyn hesitated. She's got children and a mortgage and she's scared. Patricia nodded, unsurprised. Understandable. We may not need her directly. What about the line cook Marcus you mentioned, and he's been keeping notes for 2 years? He told me Wednesday morning. I need to speak with him. Patricia capped her pen. Evelyn, I want to explain to you what we're looking at so you understand the full scope of what you're potentially part of. She folded her hands on the table. We have 3 former employees who experienced terminations with a structurally identical pattern, documentation filed, preemptively termination framed as policy violation settlement, offered quickly with NDA. Their NDAs restrict them from speaking publicly about their specific circumstances, but they do not restrict them from providing confidential information to legal counsel in the context of an active investigation. That's a door that's open. She paused. We also have Cole's documentation of Blake's behavior toward vendors and contractors over the past 18 months, a pattern of financial manipulation and intimidation that goes beyond the employment context. And we now have your situation, which is current and active and notably does not yet include an NDA because you have not signed anything. He gave me the separation notice, Evelyn said. I didn't sign it. Patricia's expression shifted slightly, just slightly, but Evelyn caught it. You didn't sign the separation notice, Patricia said slowly. He pushed it across the desk. I read it and set it back down. Patricia looked at her. Did he tell you that you needed to sign it? He did not. Did you take it with you? No. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Evelyn, I need you to understand something. If you did not sign that notice and if he did not explicitly require your signature before you left the room, there is a reasonable argument that the termination has not been formally executed yet. She paused. Which means that if he moved forward with terminating you this week without properly completing that process, he may have created an additional procedural problem for himself on top of everything else. Evelyn absorbed this. He was in a hurry, she said, thinking back to that afternoon. He wanted me out of his office. He wanted the conversation to end. He pushed the paper across the desk, and I read it, and I left, and he didn't call me back. Because he assumed you would either come back to sign it or that the conversation itself constituted acceptance, Patricia said, which is the kind of assumption a man makes when he's done this enough times that he's gotten sloppy about the details. She looked at Evelyn with the particular expression of someone seeing an unexpected advantage materialize. This doesn't change the fundamental situation, but it may affect the leverage. Evelyn sat with this for a moment. Then she said, what do you need from me? Your verbal account which you've given me. Your willingness to be a named party if this escalates to a formal complaint. And Patricia paused. Your permission to use your situation as the current active anchor for a complaint that also addresses the pattern of prior terminations. You're going to use my case to open the door for the others, Evelyn said. Yes. Even though they can't speak publicly, the complaint can be filed on the basis of the current situation while referencing the documented pattern. The prior employees don't have to speak publicly for the pattern to be visible to the labor board. Patricia held her gaze. But you do have to be willing to stand at the center of this. Your name will be on it. Your face is already on a video with 14,000 views. This will not be quiet. Evelyn thought about Rachel. She thought about her savings account. She thought about 27 years of showing up and doing her job and treating every person who sat down at her tables like their hunger mattered. She thought about Cole saying you were the only person in that room who saw a human being instead of a reputation. She thought about 3 other women who had signed papers and gone quiet because they had no other choice. I'm in, she said. Patricia nodded, capped her pen. One more thing, she said. Cole is planning to be present at whatever meeting or confrontation comes out of this. I want to ask you directly whether that's something you're comfortable with, because his presence will attract attention, and that attention will shape how this story is told. His presence is the reason any of this exists, Evelyn said. Of course I'm comfortable with it. Patricia allowed herself a small, brief expression that was not quite a smile, but lived in that neighborhood. All right, she said, don't sign anything Blake gives you before talking to me first. And Evelyn, she paused at the edge of standing. Don't change anything about how you're working this week. Come in on time, do your job, smile at the customers. Give him absolutely nothing to add to that file. That's all I've been doing, Evelyn said. I know, Patricia said. That's exactly why we're in the position we're in. She told Marcus that evening after close standing in the empty kitchen, while the last of the day's heat came off the flat top. He listened to the whole thing with his arms crossed and his expression doing the careful, neutral thing it did when he was processing something significant. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So he's been building this case for 6 weeks, Marcus said. This Cole Harrison. He came into your diner because he was tired and hungry after a funeral, and you gave him coffee, and now 6 weeks later, there's a lawyer and a complaint to the labor board, and 3 women who signed NDAs who might finally get some kind of answer. That's about the shape of it, Evelyn said, because you gave him a cup of coffee. That's where it started, yes. Marcus unfolded his arms. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at her. I'm going to speak to the lawyer, he said. Marcus, I told you you don't have to. 2 years, he said. I've had 2 years of notes sitting in a folder on my computer at home because I didn't know what to do with them. Because I didn't think one person's observations were enough to mean anything. Because every time I thought about going to HR, I thought they worked for him, not for us. His voice was even and direct. I've been waiting for something to attach those notes to, something real. He looked at her. Give me the lawyer's number. She gave it to him. Friday arrived with a quality of tension that everyone in the restaurant felt, but nobody named directly. Evelyn worked her section. She smiled at customers. She remembered Frank's coffee and Mrs. Hartwell's cream and the young Saturday couple's extra napkins. She moved through the morning rush in the lunch crowd with the practiced, steady efficiency of 27 years. She noticed Adrian watching her from the manager's station more than usual. She noticed the tightness in his jaw, the way he held his phone, as though expecting a call he both wanted and dreaded. She noticed that Kelly had been replaced today by a different assistant, someone she hadn't seen before, someone who appeared to be recording things in a different kind of notebook. She noticed all of it, and she kept moving. At 1:45 in the afternoon, Cole Harrison walked through the front door. Not on his day, not at his usual time. He was wearing the same leather vest, the same boots. He looked the same as he always did, deliberate, unrushed, inhabiting his own presence without apology. But he was not alone. Behind him walked 2 other men, both wearing cuts similar to his, both carrying the particular quietness of people who are not looking for trouble, but are entirely prepared to meet it if it comes. And beside them, Patricia Reyes, briefcase in hand, reading glasses on her head, the expression of a woman arriving at a meeting she has been preparing for with considerable care. The entire restaurant went still. Adrian Blake came out from the back the moment he saw them. His face moved through several expressions, rapidly, surprise, recognition, calculation, and then the settling into the cold composure of a man who has decided to perform confidence regardless of what he's actually feeling. Mr. Harrison, he said, I don't believe you were invited. No, Cole said, I wasn't. He looked at Adrian with the particular steadiness of a man who has been underestimated by people like Adrian Blake for long enough that it stopped affecting his blood pressure years ago. That's generally how accountability works. It tends to show up without an invitation. Patricia stepped forward. My name is Patricia Reyes, she said, producing a card from her jacket pocket and holding it toward Adrian with the efficiency of a person who does not expect to have to introduce herself twice. I represent a coalition of current and former employees of the Rosewood Diner chain. I have documentation I'd like to review with you in a setting of your choosing. I am happy to do this in your office, or we can have this conversation here. She let that land. Your choice. Adrian looked at the card. He looked at Cole. He looked at Patricia. He looked at the restaurant full of customers who had gone entirely quiet and were watching with the focused attention of people who understand they are witnessing something real. He looked at Evelyn standing at the edge of her section with the coffee pot in her hand, watching him with the steady, clear gaze of a woman who is not afraid. His jaw tightened. My office, he said. Of course, Patricia said pleasantly. Cole turned toward Evelyn as he passed her section. He didn't stop. He didn't say anything, but he looked at her with an expression that she understood, the look of a man telling a woman that the thing she started on a Tuesday afternoon when she picked up a menu and crossed a room had arrived at exactly the place it was always going to arrive. She gave him a small nod. He kept walking. And as the office door closed behind Patricia and Cole and the others and the restaurant, let out a collective breath it had apparently been holding. Evelyn Parker stood in the middle of her section and felt something she had not expected to feel in this moment. Not triumph, not relief, something more like the deep satisfaction of a structure holding under weight, like a thing built correctly finally being tested correctly. She went back to work. Table 6 needed more water. Table 2 had been waiting patiently for the check. The coffee at the counter had gone lukewarm and needed a fresh pot. She took care of all of it, because that was her job, and she had never once in 27 years done anything less than her job. While behind a closed door at the back of the restaurant, she had spent half her life in something that had been broken for a long time, was finally slowly beginning to be set right. The office door stayed closed for 41 minutes. Evelyn knew because she counted, not obsessively, not standing outside the door with her ear pressed against it, but in the way that a person counts things when they are trying to hold themselves steady, a background awareness running underneath everything else she was doing, which was her job, which was what she had committed to doing until the last minute of the last shift, regardless of what was happening in the back of the building. Table 6 got their water. Table 2 got their check. The coffee got fresh. A family of 4 came in for an early dinner, and Evelyn seated them herself because Tommy had gone to restock the back shelves and she was closest to the door. She brought their menus and took their drink orders and smiled at their youngest, a girl of about 7, who was very seriously studying the dessert page of the menu before even looking at the entrees, which Evelyn privately considered an excellent approach to dining. She did all of this while 41 minutes passed. The other staff moved through the shift with the particular careful energy of people trying to act normal in a situation that is not normal. Marcus was visible through the kitchen, passed through more often than usual, finding reasons to look out at the dining room. Diane, who had come in for the dinner shift and had clearly sensed the atmosphere, the moment she walked through the door, kept glancing toward the back hallway with the expression of someone who wants to ask a question and has decided, wisely, that this is not the moment. Tommy knew something was happening. Tommy always knew when something was happening. He had the antenna of a young person who had grown up watching adults navigate difficult situations, and he had made himself quietly useful in the way of someone who understands that the best thing they can offer right now is competent invisibility. At 41 minutes, the office door opened. Patricia came out first. Her expression was the controlled neutrality of a lawyer who has been trained not to show results in her posture, but there was something in the set of her shoulders, a particular straightness, that said what her face wasn't saying. Cole came out behind her. He looked across the dining room and found Evelyn immediately the way he always found her, with that practiced attention that took in the whole room and knew where she was without appearing to search. He gave her nothing, no nod, no expression, just a direct look that lasted 2 seconds and then moved on. Adrian Blake came out last. He did not look like the man who had sat across from Evelyn in that office on Tuesday with a folder prepared and a separation notice ready, in the complete confidence of a person executing a plan he had run before. He looked like a man who had spent 41 minutes having the structure of that confidence systematically disassembled, piece by piece, by someone who had spent weeks preparing specifically for the task. He walked toward the front of the restaurant without speaking to anyone. his phone already coming out of his pocket, and he was through the front door before the phone was fully at his ear. Kelly, the original Kelly who had been watching from the hostess station, with the particular alertness of someone whose professional survival depends on reading which direction the wind is blowing, watched him go and then looked at Patricia and then looked at the floor. Patricia walked directly to Evelyn's section and sat down at the nearest table. Evelyn brought her coffee without being asked. Patricia wrapped both hands around the mug and looked up. "We need to talk," she said, "but not here and not tonight. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" "I'm off tomorrow," Evelyn said. "Yes. 9 o'clock. She produced a card. "Cole will be there." "What happened in that room?" Evelyn asked. Patricia looked at her for a moment with the expression of a woman calibrating exactly how much to say in a public space. "What happened," she said carefully, "is that Adrian Blake discovered that the situation he believed he had complete control over has more dimensions than he accounted for." She paused. "And that some of those dimensions have very sharp edges." She left it there. Evelyn held the card. She watched Patricia go. She stood in the middle of her section in the restaurant she had worked in for 27 years and felt the particular suspended quality of a moment that is standing between what just happened and what happens next. Cole passed her on his way out. He had his jacket on, keys in his hand. He stopped beside her for exactly the amount of time it took to say 3 words. 9 o'clock, come." Then he was out the door, and the 2 men who had come with him followed, and the restaurant resumed its normal rhythms, the way a body resumes breathing after a shock, not immediately, not without some residual trembling, but steadily. Evelyn went to check on the family of 4. The 7-year-old had ordered the chocolate cake as a meal. Her parents looked apologetic. Evelyn told them the cake was excellent and brought it without any further editorial comment because she had learned a long time ago that some decisions deserve to be respected rather than redirected. She told Rachel that night. Not everything. Not the legal details. Not the specifics of what Patricia had said. Not the 41-minute count or the look on Adrian Blake's face when he came out of that office. But the essential shape of it. That she had been fired. That there were people helping her. That something was in motion and she needed Rachel to know before it potentially became visible in ways that might reach her. Rachel was quiet for a long time after Evelyn finished. Then she said, "Mom, how long have you known you were going to be fired?" "Since Wednesday of last week, realistically." "He told me Tuesday." "And you didn't call me." "I didn't want to worry you before I had something to tell you." "Mom." Rachel's voice had the particular layered quality of a daughter managing several emotions at once, fear, frustration, and underneath both of those, something warmer. You have been carrying this alone for days while I've been calling you every night talking about my own problems. Your problems are real problems. They deserve the time. So do yours." Rachel's voice cracked slightly, and she stopped and took a breath, and when she spoke again, she was steadier. "Tell me what you need from me. Practically, what do you need?" "I need you not to panic," Evelyn said. "I need you to trust that I'm handling this. And I need you to know that whatever happens, we're going to be all right. Both of us." "You can't promise that." "I've been promising you things since you were 3 days old," Evelyn said. "My track record is pretty good." A sound from Rachel that was half laugh, half something that would have been crying if Rachel Parker allowed herself to cry on the phone with her mother, which she generally considered a one-way direction of care that should be reserved for actual emergencies. "Tell me about this man," Rachel said. "Cole, this biker. What do you want to know? What's he like, really?" Evelyn thought about it. She thought about a man wrapping both hands around a coffee mug after 11 hours on the road coming from a friend's funeral. She thought about an envelope left under a mug for a family he didn't know. She thought about the look on his face when she had said, "I know what I need to know," the look of a person encountering something they had stopped expecting. "He's the kind of person," she said slowly, "who makes other people feel like they don't have to explain themselves." She paused. He takes people as they are, without making a production of it, without requiring them to justify their presence. She paused again. "I think maybe that's why I served him, because he walked in and sat down and all he was doing was being a person who needed a meal, and another person looked at him and decided that wasn't enough to qualify him for basic dignity." She thought about it. You can't let that stand. Some things you can't just let stand. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "I love you, Mom," she said. "I love you too, baby." Call after the meeting tomorrow. The second I'm out. Patricia Rhea's office was on the fourth floor of a building downtown that smelled of good carpet and old paper. The combination that lives in spaces where serious work has been done for a long time. Evelyn arrived at 8:55 and found Cole already in the waiting area, a cup of coffee in his hand and a book in his jacket pocket. He stood when she came in. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said 9 o'clock," she replied. "I don't do late." The corner of his mouth moved. "I know." Patricia's assistant brought them in at 9 exactly. Patricia was behind her desk with the organized efficiency of a woman whose working hours are too valuable to spend on ramp-up. She had a legal pad, a series of folders, and the reading glasses on her nose rather than pushed up on her head, which Evelyn was beginning to understand meant she was in active working mode rather than listening mode. "Sit down, both of you," she said. "I want to walk through what happened yesterday and where we are now." They sat. "When Cole and I walked into that office yesterday," Patricia began, "Adrian Blake was operating under the assumption that his position was secure. He had his documentation file, he had legal cover for the termination, and he believed that the prior settlements were sealed tightly enough that they couldn't be used against him." She paused. "He was wrong about the last part. The NDAs those women signed restrict them from public disclosure. They do not restrict the pattern of those settlements from being observed, documented, and presented as evidence of systematic practice. That distinction matters enormously." Evelyn watched her. "What I presented to him," Patricia continued, "was a formal complaint filed with the State Labor Board filed yesterday morning before we walked in, citing a documented pattern of retaliatory termination targeting employees who challenged management authority. Evelyn's case is the anchor because it's current and active, and because, as I told you, the separation was not properly executed." She looked at Evelyn. "He didn't get your signature. He assumed the conversation was sufficient. It wasn't, which means that as of yesterday, you are still technically an employee of this company." Evelyn absorbed this. "He didn't know that when we walked in," Cole said. Patricia led with it. "It's called establishing the baseline of a negotiation," Patricia said without particular inflection. "You let the other party understand the ground before you discuss what's built on it." "How did he respond?" Evelyn asked. "He called his own attorney on speakerphone while we were in the room," Patricia said, "which told me two things. First, that he was rattled enough to abandon the performance of confidence. Second, that his attorney, who I know professionally and who is competent, immediately told him to stop talking, which he almost did." She allowed the smallest pause. "He got in 3 sentences before his attorney cut him off. Those 3 sentences were quite informative." "What did he say?" Cole asked. Patricia looked at her notepad. "He said this is a pattern she established herself. I have 11 weeks of documentation. He said the other situations were resolved and closed. And he said, I don't answer to someone who walks in off the street with a biker." The room was quiet for a moment. "He referenced the prior situations," Evelyn said. "Voluntarily," Patricia said, "in front of witnesses, before his attorney could stop him." She looked at Evelyn over her reading glasses. "You understand what that means." "He confirmed there were prior situations. On record, in the presence of myself, Cole, and 2 other witnesses." Patricia set the notepad down. "His attorney spent the remainder of the meeting cleaning that up, and she did a competent job, but you cannot unring that bell." Cole shifted in his chair. He had been listening with the focused stillness of a man who processes information inwardly rather than responding to each piece as it arrives. "What does this mean practically?" he asked. "For Evelyn, for the others?" "Practically," Patricia said, "it means the following. The Labor Board complaint is filed and active. Given the voluntary statement Blake made, I will be amending the complaint today to include reference to the prior settlements as a part of an established pattern. The board will open a review. That review will likely take 60 to 90 days. She paused. "In the meantime, because Evelyn's termination was not properly executed, I am notifying the company this morning that she is prepared to return to work on her regular schedule. If they attempt to prevent that return, they create an additional violation. If they allow it, they are essentially acknowledging the termination was procedurally flawed." Evelyn blinked. "You're sending me back." "If you're willing." The thought of walking back into Rosewood Diner, past the table where Adrian had pointed, and declared past the manager's station, where Kelly had taken her notes, past the kitchen where Marcus had kept 2 years of careful documentation, was a complicated one. Not frightening, not even painful exactly, just layered, dense with meaning. Yes, she said, I'm willing. Patricia nodded. There's one more piece. She opened the second folder. Cole has been doing something beyond the employment investigation that I was not fully aware of until this week when he brought me additional documentation. She looked at Cole. Do you want to tell her, or should I? Cole looked at Evelyn. 3 months ago, he said, before any of this started with you and me, a business owner I know came to me with a problem. He runs a small contractor, operation legitimate family business, been in the city for 20 years. He had a contract with a commercial property development group. The development group is controlled by a holding company. That holding company has Adrian Blake on its board. He paused. The contractor started experiencing pressure. Contract terms changed after signing. Payment delays became routine. When he pushed back, he was told the contract would be terminated and he'd be blacklisted from future bids in the area. His voice was even and flat, the way voices go when they're describing something that made them genuinely angry and they've had time to process the anger into something more useful. The contractor is not a large man with a law firm and a network. He's a guy who employs 14 people and has spent 20 years building something honest. And someone on a board he'll never meet decided his livelihood was a lever to be pulled. Evelyn was very still. This isn't just about the diner, she said. It was never just about the diner, Cole said. Blake uses authority at every level he can reach. He's been doing it for years. The restaurant chain is where he practices on individuals. The development board is where he practices on businesses. He paused. I've been connecting those dots for 3 months. I brought Patricia the contractor's documentation this week. Patricia picked it up from there. What Cole has given me expands the scope of this significantly. We're no longer looking at a labor complaint only. We're looking at a pattern of abuse of authority across multiple contexts, employment and commercial. That pattern, fully documented, is the kind of thing that does not stay in a labor board review. It goes to the board of the restaurant chain itself. It goes to the other companies Blake sits on, and it goes to the business press. She paused. Adrian Blake has built a career on the assumption that the people he uses as levers are too isolated, too scared, or too small to connect with each other. Cole has spent 3 months making those connections. The room held that for a moment. Evelyn looked at Cole. He was looking at the folder Patricia had opened, not at her. 3 months, she said quietly. You've been building this for 3 months, and then you walked into the diner. I needed food, he said. I was tired. It was a coincidence. Was it? He looked at her then. The investigation was already running, he said. I wasn't there because of Blake. I was there because I was hungry, and it was the nearest diner on a stretch of road I'd driven 100 times. A pause. What you did that wasn't part of any plan. That was just you being who you are. He held her gaze. But you made the connection. You made me human to the people in that room. You made it impossible for Blake to maintain the fiction that it was only about policy. Another pause. Without that, the investigation is documents and patterns and legal arguments. Important, but invisible. With that, he stopped. With that, it has a face, Evelyn said. Yes. She thought about that. She thought about 30 seconds of footage of herself crossing a dining room floor. She thought about 14,000 views and hundreds of comments and people she would never meet asking, is she okay? What happened to the old waitress? She thought about her mother saying, you are not serving their ego, you are serving their hunger. All right, she said to Patricia, what do we do next? What they did next was methodical and, from the outside, almost invisible. Patricia sent the notification about Evelyn's return to work by certified letter to the corporate office copied to Blake's personal attorney. Evelyn showed up for her Monday morning shift exactly as she would have on any other Monday early uniform press section set before the first customer arrived. Adrian Blake was not there. He had not been there since Friday. In his absence, the assistant manager, a quiet, competent man named Gerald, who had worked for the chain for 8 years and Evelyn had long suspected privately disagreed with Blake's methods. For most of them, ran the morning shift without comment. He looked at Evelyn when she came in, looked at the schedule on the wall and said, your section's ready. Thank you, Gerald, she said. Good to have you back, he said, and he said it with a brevity that contained more than it expressed, and she appreciated it. Marcus looked through the kitchen window and gave her a single slow nod. She gave him one back. Diane said good morning and meant it, and then very quickly found something to do in the other direction, which was also a form of communication Evelyn understood and accepted. Tommy punched her lightly on the shoulder as he passed, which was how Tommy expressed the things he couldn't articulate, and she let him. She worked a full Monday shift, then a Tuesday, then a Wednesday. On Wednesday, Cole came in, not at 12:43, earlier at 11 when the lunch rush was still building and the restaurant was moving at the particular busy hum that Evelyn had always privately liked, the productive noise of a place doing what it was meant to do. He sat in her section. She brought him coffee without being asked. He wrapped both hands around the mug. Patricia heard from the corporate office this morning, he said. She topped off his coffee and set the pot down and sat across from him in the booth. Gerald was covering the floor and she had earned 5 minutes and she was not going to apologize for taking them. What did they say? They're conducting an internal review of Blake's management conduct across all his locations. He paused. That's company language for, we read the complaint, we looked at the pattern, and we are significantly concerned about our legal exposure. How long does an internal review take? In a situation like this, with an active labor board complaint and documentation of the commercial manipulation on top of it, a week, maybe 2. He looked at her. They're going to move fast because every day they don't move is another day the story is sitting out there with 32,000 views. 32,000, she said, as of this morning. She looked at her coffee cup for a moment. Coltime, she said, what do you want out of all this for yourself? Not for me, not for the contractor, not for the other women. What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment. There's a food distribution program I've been trying to expand, he said finally. We run it through the club twice a year. We partner with 3 local organizations and get food to about 800 families. We've been trying to get a commercial kitchen space for a permanent prep facility for 2 years. Every time we get close, something falls through. Funding or the space gets taken or the permit process. He stopped. I think one of those roadblocks was Blake working through the development board, not because he knew what we were doing specifically, just because he was in the habit of closing doors for people like us. People like you, she said, bikers, people who don't fit his idea of who deserves access. He looked at her steadily. I want the door open. That's what I want, not revenge, not his job, not to be vindicated or celebrated or acknowledged. He paused. Just the door open. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. That's all? That's everything, he said. The call Patricia had been expecting came on a Thursday 11 days after the complaint was filed. She called Evelyn immediately after, and her voice had a quality to it that Evelyn had not heard before, something underneath the professional control, something that was almost warm. The corporate board has requested a formal meeting, Patricia said. All parties, they want to sit down together in a structured conversation with legal representation present. She paused. They also want to discuss a resolution to the complaint before it goes further with the labor board. A settlement, Evelyn said. Not exactly. They're not offering a settlement in the traditional sense. They're offering something more substantial. Another pause. They've apparently been looking at Blake's conduct across all locations, and they've found more than we gave them. They went looking after we gave them the framework, and they found things we hadn't even identified yet. Evelyn sat down at her kitchen table. How much more? Enough that the conversation we're going to have is not going to be about settling your specific complaint, Patricia said. It's going to be about the structure of the company itself. Her voice was careful, but there was that warmth underneath it again, barely audible. Evelyn, I've been doing this for 22 years. What's about to happen in that room, I want you to be prepared for the fact that it's larger than what we started with. How do I prepare for that? By being exactly who you've been this entire time, Patricia said. Because what got us here wasn't the documentation or the legal strategy or Cole's network. What got us here was 30 seconds of footage of a 63-year-old woman walking across a dining room floor with a menu because she decided that a human being deserved a meal. Her voice was clean and direct. That's your foundation. Walk into that room on that. The meeting was held on a Saturday in a conference room on the 7th floor of the corporate headquarters 15 miles from Rosewood Diner. Evelyn wore the same clothes she wore to church, not because it was Sunday, but because they were the clothes that made her feel like herself. Rachel had offered to lend her something more formal, and Evelyn had declined politely and put on her own things. Cole wore the leather vest. She noticed it when he met her in the lobby, and she looked at it and looked at him, and he looked back at her with an expression that was entirely clear. Really, she said. Completely, he said. She didn't argue. She understood it. You don't walk into the room where someone tried to erase you and make yourself smaller on their behalf. You walk in as the full version of the thing they tried to dismiss. That's not aggression. That's integrity. Patricia was already upstairs. They rode the elevator in silence that was companionable rather than tense, the silence of two people who have said what needed to be said and are now simply moving toward the thing they prepared for. The conference room held 8 people, 3 members of the corporate board, 2 attorneys representing the company, Patricia, Cole, and Evelyn. Adrian Blake was not present. That absence said everything. The board chair, a woman named Constance Webb, who had the precise manner of someone who has spent decades in rooms where precision matters, opened the meeting by saying that she wanted to begin with an acknowledgement. The conduct that led to this meeting, Constance Webb said, reflects a pattern of behavior that is not consistent with the values this company was founded on and that this board holds itself accountable to. I want to state that directly and without qualification before we proceed to specifics. She looked at Evelyn when she said it. Evelyn held her gaze and gave a small nod that said, I hear you. We'll see what follows. What followed was 2 hours. 2 hours of documentation, reviewed timelines, established patterns, confirmed. 2 hours of Patricia presenting the full scope of what had been gathered, the employment record, the commercial manipulation, the contractor's situation, the prior terminations. 2 hours of the company's own attorneys occasionally interjecting with clarifications that Evelyn noticed consistently framed the findings as worse than Patricia had presented them, because the internal review had found things that even Cole's network hadn't reached. Adrian Blake had been running his personal authority like a private operation inside the company's structure for 6 years. The board had not known. And this was the distinction that Constance Webb made carefully with the particular honesty of a person who has decided that the moment requires more honesty than is comfortable. They had not looked hard enough. There are things a board should catch, Constance Webb said at one point, her voice level. We didn't catch them. That is a failure I own on behalf of this board, and it changes what we're responsible for going forward. Cole, who had been listening with his forearms on the table and his expression giving away nothing, said, I appreciate that. And he said it with a weight that made clear he meant it not as politeness, but as the recognition of one person who understands accountability toward another. At the 2-hour mark, the company's lead attorney presented a proposal. Adrian Blake had been placed on administrative leave pending the conclusion of the internal review. The probability of his return in any capacity was, the attorney said with careful understatement, minimal. The company was prepared to make the following commitments: reinstatement of all affected employees with full back pay and benefits, a structural review of management accountability processes across all locations, an independent ombudsman position for employee complaints. And here the attorney paused and glanced briefly at his notes in a way that told Evelyn this part had been discussed extensively before the meeting: a financial contribution to the community food distribution program currently operated by Cole Harrison's organization, sufficient to fund the commercial kitchen facility they had been unable to secure. The room was very quiet after he finished. Cole looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked up. The kitchen, he said, that's real, not a gesture. The contribution is for the full facility cost, the attorney said, with a contractual commitment, not a promise. Cole nodded slowly. Evelyn watched him absorb this, the thing he had said he wanted, arriving in a form more complete than he had asked for. She watched him process it with the careful interior attention of a man who doesn't perform emotion, but doesn't extinguish it either. All right, he said quietly. Then he looked at Evelyn. And she saw it then, what lived underneath the steadiness, underneath the deliberate calm, underneath 11 Tuesdays of coffee and pot roast, in the careful language of a man who had learned to hold his feelings in a space where nobody could use them against him. He was moved, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that anyone who didn't know how to look would catch, but she knew how to look. 27 years of watching people at their most human, hungry, tired, scared, relieved, grateful, had given her that. She gave him the same look she had given him on the very first day, the one that said, sit down, sweetheart, you're safe here. He gave her a look she had not seen from him before, something that meant thank you. I didn't know I was going to need this. Constance Webb turned to Evelyn. Ms. Parker, as she said, the board would like to offer you, in addition to full reinstatement, a newly created position. Community Relations Manager for the regional chain. The position comes with a salary increase and full benefits, and it involves the work you have apparently been doing informally for 27 years, making sure this company treats the people who walk through its doors like human beings. She paused. We should have had this position for a long time. We didn't. I'm sorry it took this to create it. Evelyn looked at her. She thought about her mother's words. You are not serving their ego. You are serving their hunger. She thought about a 7-year-old girl ordering chocolate cake as a meal and the look on that girl's face when it arrived without judgment. She thought about Frank Delgado and Mrs. Hartwell and the young couple who always needed extra napkins and a man named Cole who had wrapped both hands around a coffee mug like a person holding on to something warm after a long time of cold. I'll take it, she said. Good guy, Constance Webb said, and for the first time in 2 hours, something in her expression that had been professionally closed opened slightly just at the edges. They rode the elevator back down together, Orisipo and Evelyn, in a silence that was different from the one on the way up, fuller, heavier with meaning but not with weight. In the lobby, Cole held the door open for her, and they stood outside in the afternoon, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Cole said, My grandmother used to say that good things take longer than they should and cost more than they ought to. Smart woman, Evelyn said. She was. And he looked at her. And she said they were worth it anyway, he said, every time. Evelyn looked at him, standing there, leather vest, gray beard, the weight of 50-some years in a road she would never fully understand, and she thought about the Tuesday afternoon when she had crossed a dining room floor with a menu and changed the direction of more lives than she had any idea of. Cole, she said, when the kitchen is built, will you let me help with the food drives? He looked at her for a long moment. Evelyn, he said, you are going to be the first person I call. She nodded once. He nodded once, and that was enough. The way that the truest things between people who understand each other rarely need more than that. She walked to her car. She sat down and pulled out her phone and called Rachel. Rachel picked up on the first ring. Mom, she said, one word and in it, everything the fear she had been holding for days, the love underneath the fear, the particular hope of a daughter who had watched her mother be exactly who she was her entire life and had always quietly been in awe of it. I'm all right, baby, Evelyn said. I'm more than all right. She heard Rachel exhale a long, full breath, the kind you take when something you've been bracing against finally passes. Tell me everything, Rachel said. And Evelyn did. Rachel Parker showed up at Rosewood Diner on the Monday after the corporate meeting without calling ahead. Evelyn was in the middle of her morning section coffee in one hand and a fresh pad in the other when she looked up and saw her daughter standing at the door, 38 years old, her mother's eyes, her father's stubborn jaw wearing the expression of a woman who had spent the weekend sitting with something large and needed to see the place where it had all happened before she could fully believe it. Evelyn set the coffee pot down. She crossed the dining room floor, the same walk, and she wrapped her arms around her daughter in the middle of the entrance and held on, and Rachel held back with the particular grip of someone who has been scared for a long time and is only now releasing it. You didn't have to drive all the way here, Evelyn said into Rachel's hair. Yes, I did, Rachel said. I needed to see it. She pulled back and looked at the room. Took it in the way you take in a place that has existed in your mind as a story and now has to reconcile itself with actual physical reality. The booths, the counter, the kitchen passed through the manager's station near the back, where Adrian Blake had watched and documented and built his case, and then had it disassembled around him in 41 minutes. It's smaller than I imagined, Rachel said. Most things are, Evelyn said. Come on, I'll get you breakfast. She seated Rachel at the window booth, Cole's booth, though she didn't say so because some things are private in the way that certain chairs in certain rooms are private. And she brought her coffee and the good eggs, and she sat across from her during the 9:15 lull when the morning crowd had thinned and the lunch rush hadn't built yet. Tell me what you're actually feeling, Rachel said. Not the version you give me on the phone where everything's handled and fine. Evelyn looked at her daughter. Tired, she said. The good kind, like after you finish something that took everything you had and you're glad it's done, and you know you'd do it the same way again. She wrapped her hands around her own coffee mug, the habit of it, the same gesture she'd watched Cole make a dozen times in this same section, and a little off balance. Because for weeks, the thing in front of me was clear. Serve him, hold the line, do the job, face what comes. And now the thing in front of me is different, bigger, and I'm still figuring out what it looks like. The new position, Rachel said. Community Relations Manager, Evelyn said, and saying it out loud was still strange, the words not quite fitting the shape of who she thought she was, though she was beginning to understand that the shape of who you are expands if you let it. I've been doing the work for 27 years without the title. I know how to do the work. It's the authority that's new. Having someone actually say what you know matters. What you've learned from watching people, from serving people, from paying attention that has value beyond what we've been paying you for it. Rachel was watching her with the particular attention she had inherited directly uncut. It always had that value, Rachel said. He just finally got caught pretending it didn't. Evelyn looked at her daughter and felt the specific pride that moves in both directions at once. A mother proud of her child for being exactly right, and something older than that, something that recognized in Rachel the forward motion of a quality that had passed from woman to woman in their family for longer than either of them could trace. How are you doing? Evelyn asked. Really, the job search. Rachel looked at her eggs for a moment. I have an interview Thursday, she said, at a nonprofit downtown. Community outreach coordinator, she looked up. It pays less than the marketing job. A lot less. But when I read the description, I felt. She stopped, started again. I felt like it was actually something I could care about, not just something I could do. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Take the interview seriously, she said. I will. And if it's right, take the job. The money figures itself out when the work is right. Rachel gave her a look that said that is the most aggressively optimistic thing anyone has ever said in the history of personal finance. Says the woman who just got a salary increase after being fired, she said. I wasn't fired, Evelyn said. I didn't sign the paper. Rachel laughed the full version, unguarded, and Evelyn laughed with her, and Marcus, visible through the kitchen window, looked out at the sound of it and went back to his work with the small, private expression of a man who is glad a thing turned out correctly. Gerald called her into the back office that afternoon. He had been running the location since Blake's administrative leave began, and he was doing it the way he did everything quietly, competently, without making a production of the authority that had landed on him unexpectedly. He was not Adrian Blake. He would never be Adrian Blake, and that was entirely to his credit. I wanted to talk to you before the corporate team comes down on Wednesday, Gerald said. He was sitting on the edge of the desk rather than behind it, which told her something about how he was approaching the conversation. They're sending someone to walk through the new management accountability process with us. I've been told you're going to be part of that conversation in your new capacity. I've been told the same thing, Evelyn said. I want to say something before that happens. He looked at her directly with the expression of a man who has been holding a thought for longer than is comfortable. I've been here 8 years. I've watched Blake treat people, staff, vendors, customers in ways that I should have pushed back on harder than I did. He stopped. I made the calculation a lot of people make, that it wasn't my fight, or that I didn't have enough standing, or that one person's objection wouldn't change anything. He held her gaze. You had the same reasons not to push back that I had. Better reasons, actually. You had more at stake, and you did it anyway. Evelyn looked at him. Gerald, she said, you kept the restaurant running correctly while all of this was happening. You treated Cole Harrison like a normal customer from the first day you were in a position to do so without Blake watching. You told me my section was ready when I came back. She paused. You did what you could from where you were standing. That's not nothing. He looked at the floor for a moment. It should have been more, he said. Yes, she said, but it wasn't nothing. And now we both have the chance to do more going forward. That's what matters. He was quiet for a long moment. This place is going to be different, he said. I want it to be different. I want it to be the kind of place where what happened to you and what happened to Cole on that first day is genuinely impossible. He looked at her. I'm going to need your help to do that. You have it, she said. You always did. The corporate team arrived Wednesday with the particular organized energy of people who have been handed a crisis and converted it into a process, which is the institutional way of transforming something painful into something functional. There were 3 of them, a woman named Sonia from HR, a man named David from operations, and Constance Webb herself, which told Evelyn that the board was taking the implementation as seriously as the commitment. The morning was structured and thorough. They walked through the new ombudsman process, how complaints would be filed, how they would be escalated, who would handle them independently of location management. They reviewed the changes to the performance documentation process, the new requirement for HR co-signature on any formal employee action. They discussed training for all management-level staff across the chain. Evelyn sat at the conference table in the back of the restaurant with Gerald and Diane, and Marcus had been asked to represent the kitchen staff, and she listened and asked questions and made notes and understood in the quiet professional part of her mind that had always been sharper than the job she held allowed it to be, that she was good at this. That reading a room, identifying the places where a process would break down against human reality, understanding what people actually needed versus what policy assumed they needed. She had been doing all of that for 27 years. She just hadn't been doing it in a room with a title. At one point, Constance Webb looked at her across the table and said, "What would you add from your experience?" Evelyn thought about it for a moment. "The ombudsman needs to be visible," she said, "not just available. People need to see the position, know the person, feel like it's a real channel and not a suggestion box." She paused. When people are in a difficult situation with someone who has authority over them, the thing that stops them from reporting it isn't that the channel doesn't exist. It's that they don't believe the channel is real. They don't believe anything will actually happen. She paused again. The way you make them believe it's real is by being present, by showing up, by being a person in the room, not a phone number on a poster. Constance Webb wrote something down. "That's going in the implementation framework," she said. Verbatim. Evelyn nodded and went back to her notes. Diane, sitting 2 chairs down, caught her eye and gave her a look that said, "Approximately, I have worked beside you for 9 years, and I had absolutely no idea." Evelyn gave her a look back that said, "Neither did I, honestly." But the thing that happened on Thursday was not something anyone had planned for. Evelyn was in the middle of the lunch rush. She was still working her section because she had been explicit with Gerald and with the corporate team that she was not giving up her tables, that the floor was where she understood people best, and she was not about to stop doing it just because her job description had grown, when the door opened and a woman came in alone. She was in her mid-40s, well-dressed, but with something careful in her posture, the particular cautiousness of a person who has thought hard about whether to do the thing she is currently doing. She stood at the door for a moment and looked around the room, and her eyes landed on Evelyn with the specific focus of someone who came in looking for exactly that. Evelyn recognized the quality of the look. She had seen it before months ago from a different woman who had come in to tell her about her son. She finished with the table she was at and crossed to the door. "Can I help you?" she said. The woman looked at her. "Are you Evelyn Parker?" "I am." "My name is Sandra Kowalski." She paused. "I was terminated from a Rosewood Diner location in Millbrook 18 months ago. I signed a document." She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I heard what happened here. A friend sent me the video, and then she sent me the follow-up articles, and she stopped again. I don't know if there's anything that can be done for me. I know I signed something, but I needed to come and see the person who—" She looked at Evelyn with the raw, unguarded expression of someone who has been quiet about something for a long time and has run out of the ability to stay quiet. "I just needed to see you." Evelyn took one look at her and said, "Come sit down." She sat Sandra Kowalski in the window booth. She brought her coffee, and she sat across from her, and she listened the way she had been listening to people for 27 years, with her full attention and no judgment, and the simple act of being completely present for someone who needed someone to be present. Sandra had been a shift manager. She had filed a complaint about a vendor payment irregularity money that seemed to be moving in a direction that didn't match the documentation. She had been told she was mistaken. A week later, Blake had begun building a file. 3 weeks after that, she was gone with an NDA and a settlement that felt, she said, like being handed money to forget something that was still happening. "The vendor payment irregularity," Evelyn said carefully. "Did you tell Patricia Reyes's office about that?" Sandra blinked. "I didn't know. I don't have her number." Evelyn reached into her apron and pulled out the card she had started carrying, the one with Patricia's number on it, because she had the instinct of a woman who understood that the world has a way of bringing things to you when you are the person who knows how to handle them. She held the card out to Sandra. "Call her today," she said. "What you described may be relevant to something that's already in motion." She paused. "You signed a document that restricted what you could say publicly. It did not restrict you from speaking to an attorney in the context of an active investigation. Call her." Sandra looked at the card. Her hand, when she took it, was not entirely steady. "I was afraid," Sandra said. "For a long time I was just afraid. That no one would believe me, that the document meant I had no options, that I should just move on." She looked at Evelyn. "And then I saw a 63-year-old waitress walk across a dining room floor with a menu because a man told her not to, and I thought—" She stopped. "You thought if she could do that, you could make a phone call," Evelyn said quietly. Sandra's eyes filled. "Yes," she said. Evelyn reached across the table and covered her hand with her own. "Make the call," she said, "today, before the fear has a chance to talk you out of it again." She meant it as instruction and encouragement both. Sandra heard it as both. She nodded and took a breath and straightened in her seat with the particular gathering of a person deciding to stop carrying something alone. She made the call from the parking lot before she drove home. Patricia's office called Evelyn that evening to confirm. The vendor payment irregularity Sandra had identified 18 months ago pointed directly to a financial manipulation that connected Blake's employment conduct to the commercial fraud Cole had documented with the contractor. It was the link between the two tracks of the investigation that Patricia had suspected existed but hadn't been able to establish. "Sandra Kowalski just became a material witness," Patricia said on the phone. "Her information connects to the restaurant chain conduct to the development board conduct in a way that no longer requires inference." A pause. "Lynn, do you understand what this means?" "It means it's bigger than we thought," Evelyn said. "It means it's complete," Patricia said. "We have the full picture now. The labor complaint, the commercial fraud, the financial manipulation. It's one coherent case, not three separate tracks." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath the steadiness that Evelyn recognized as the controlled excitement of a person who has been building something carefully for a long time and can see finally exactly where it lands. The regulatory authorities are going to have to get involved. This goes beyond the labor board. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of the evening and thought about a vendor payment irregularity that a shift manager had noticed 18 months ago and had tried to report and had been silenced for noticing. She thought about how many small, true things had been noticed by people who had then been made to feel that their noticing didn't count. She thought about how the world had a way of eventually bringing those small, true things back around. "Is Sandra protected?" she asked. "The NDA." "She was speaking to legal counsel in the context of an active investigation," Patricia said. "She's fully protected. I've already confirmed that with her directly." A pause. She sounded relieved. "She's been carrying it for a long time," Evelyn said. "A lot of people have," Patricia said. "That's what this was always really about." Cole came in on the following Tuesday. 12:43, same as always. He sat in her section. She brought his coffee without being asked. He wrapped both hands around the mug. The ritual of it so established now that it felt like something that had always existed. Like the particular way certain things between people settle into permanence without being formally declared. She sat across from him during the 11:30 lull. She had shifted her breaks to coincide with his visits, a small reorganization of her day that she had made without particularly deciding to make it the way adjustments happen when something has become important. "I heard about Sandra Kowalski," he said. "Patricia called you." "Patricia calls me when things develop." He looked at his coffee. "She came here because of you." "She came here because she was ready," Evelyn said. "I just happened to be here when she was." He looked at her with the expression she had come to know well, the one that disagreed with her assessment without making an argument of it. "Cole," she said, "how's the kitchen coming?" The shift in his expression was immediate and genuine, something loosening, something that was close to the look of a man who has been given permission to want something without having to defend the wanting. "We signed the lease on the space last week," he said. "Renovations start in 3 weeks. We're looking at operational by spring." He paused. "I've got 12 volunteers lined up for the first food drive, out of the new facility. 3 partner organizations. Projected reach of 1,100 families the first run. 1,100, she said, more than we've ever done in a single drive. He looked at her steadily. Because of the facility, because of the kitchen, because of... He stopped. Because you built it, she said. You built the relationships and the network and the documentation over 3 months before I ever handed you a menu. I just opened a door. You opened the right door, he said, at the right moment, for the right reasons. He paused. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. She thought about that. She thought about her mother's words, which had been living in the back of her mind for months now, resurfacing in different lights depending on what was in front of her. You are not serving their ego. You are serving their hunger. She looked at Cole, at the leather vest that had walked through a door and been told it didn't belong, at the hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had quietly fed and housed and helped hundreds of people without requiring acknowledgement, and at the face of a man who had come in looking for a meal after a funeral and found something neither of them had anticipated. You said you wanted the door open, she said. Just the door. That's all you wanted. Yes. And now 1,100 families. I was quiet for a moment. My grandmother used to feed anyone who came to her door, he said. I don't know how she did it on what she had, but nobody who came to that house left hungry. He looked at his coffee. I've spent 20 years trying to do at scale what she did naturally, trying to build something big enough to reach the people who don't have a door to knock on. He looked up. Spring is the first time I think we can actually do it right, consistently, sustainably. Not just twice a year with whatever resources I can pull together, but as a real operation with a real facility and a real team. He paused. That's what the kitchen means. Evelyn thought about Sandra Kowalski sitting in the same booth saying, I just needed to see you. She thought about a woman she'd never met telling her about a son who was in school now because of Cole and his people. She thought about Frank Delgado's truck in the envelope under the coffee mug and 11 Tuesdays of pot roast in the 41 minutes the office door stayed closed. She thought about how a thing that looks like a single moment, a woman crossing a dining room floor with a menu, is never actually a single moment. It's the product of 27 years of small decisions about who you're going to be when nobody's making you be anything in particular. And its consequences are never just the immediate ones. They fan out in directions you can't see from where you're standing. She hadn't known any of that when she picked up the menu. She had simply known what was right, and that it turned out was sufficient. Sure. The story became public in the way that things become public when there is enough documentation and enough momentum and enough people who are no longer willing to be quiet about what they know. A regional business journal ran the first full account 6 weeks after the corporate meeting. It was thorough and carefully sourced, and it laid out the complete picture, the employment conduct, the commercial manipulation, the financial irregularities. Sandra had identified the pattern across 6 years and multiple locations. Adrian Blake reached for comment through his attorney declined to speak. The article included a photograph of Evelyn Parker, not in the diner, not in her uniform, sitting at a table with a cup of coffee, the way a person sits when they are simply being themselves in a place they know well. The caption identified her as the community relations manager of the regional Rosewood diner chain and mentioned the incident that had started everything. It also mentioned Cole Harrison, not centrally, not as a main character in the piece, but as the person who had built the case. The article described the food distribution program, the new facility, the 1,100 families. It described him in the language of someone who had looked at the evidence and found it inconvenient to maintain earlier assumptions. Cole called her the morning the article ran. Have you seen it? He said. Marcus printed it out and taped it to the kitchen window. She said, I've seen it. How do you feel? She thought about it. Like it's the right account, she said. Like it's true, which is all I ever wanted from it. She paused. How do you feel? A silence. Like I want to get back to work, he said. There are 1,100 families to feed and a kitchen to renovate and 3 partner organizations waiting on logistics plans. His voice had the focused energy of a man who is most comfortable when there is something real and tangible in front of him to do. The story is done. The work is still ahead. That's a healthy way to be, she said. I learned it from a waitress, he said. She laughed, a real laugh, unguarded. Community relations manager, she corrected him. Right, he said, from a community relations manager who still works her own tables. Always, she said. Spring came the way it always did gradually, and then suddenly the way changes in season mirror changes in life, the shift. So incremental you almost miss it until one morning you realize it's already complete. The kitchen facility opened on a Saturday in April. Evelyn drove to the ribbon cutting with Rachel, who had taken the nonprofit job, and discovered exactly as Evelyn had said she would, that the right work had a way of making the money figure itself out. She was 3 months in and she was tired in the good way, and she talked about the people she was working with with the particular energy of someone who has found the thing they were meant to do. They parked and walked toward the building together, and Evelyn heard it before she saw it, the sound of people, dozens of them, maybe more, gathered in the particular way that people gather when something they have been waiting for has finally arrived. Cole was at the center of it, surrounded by his team and the partner organizations and 12 volunteers who had shown up on a Saturday morning to work, not to be celebrated. He saw Evelyn coming across the lot, and he moved through the crowd toward her with the unhurried purposefulness that was simply how he moved through every space. "You came," he said. "You said I'd be the first call," she said. "Here I am." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she knew, the one that was quiet and full at the same time, the one that lived underneath the steadiness. "I want to show you something," he said. He walked her inside. The facility smelled of fresh paint and new equipment, the particular smell of something that is about to become what it was built to be. The kitchen was larger than she had imagined from the descriptions. Long stainless counters, industrial ranges, walk-in storage, a prep area that could handle volume without chaos. He walked her to the far wall. There was a plaque there, small, unobtrusive, the kind of thing you'd notice if you were looking for it and might miss if you weren't. She read it. This kitchen was built because one person decided that every human being deserves a seat at the table, in honor of Evelyn Parker, who proved it. She stood in front of that plaque for a long time. Rachel, standing slightly behind her, put a hand on her shoulder and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was better than the silence. Cole stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. "You didn't have to do this," she said finally. Her voice was not entirely steady. "I know," he said. "It should say something about you," she said, "about what you built, about the work." "The work speaks for itself," he said. "It always has." He paused. "You were the one who needed to be said out loud." She looked at the plaque again. Every human being deserves a seat at the table. She thought about a Tuesday afternoon, a door opening, a man in a leather vest, a man in a suit deciding who was worth the space they occupied, and a 63-year-old woman who had spent 27 years learning in the most practical and immediate way possible that hunger doesn't discriminate and dignity doesn't have a dress code. And the only question that matters when a person walks through a door is, what do they need and can I give it to them? She had never thought of herself as someone who changed things. She had just thought of herself as someone who showed up. As it turned out, those were the same thing. On the first Tuesday after the kitchen opened, Cole Harrison came into Rosewood Diner at 12:43. He sat in Evelyn's section. She brought his coffee without being asked. He wrapped both hands around the mug. She sat across from him. They didn't talk about the plaque or the facility or the case or the article or Adrian Blake or Sandra Kowalski or Patricia Reyes or any of the machinery that had turned and turned over the past months. Frank Delgado was at the counter with his coffee. Mrs. Hartwell was in her usual corner. The young Saturday couple had come in on a Tuesday for once, and they already had extra napkins. The restaurant was full and warm and doing exactly what it was built to do, feeding people, holding them, giving them somewhere to be that felt like being cared for. Evelyn looked across the table at Cole. He was looking at his coffee with the quiet attention of a man who is exactly where he is, not somewhere else in his mind, not performing his own calm, just present. She thought about everything that had come from a single cup of coffee and a menu and a decision to cross a room. She thought about 3 women who had signed papers and stayed quiet and were no longer alone in what they knew. She thought about a contractor and 14 employees who still had jobs. She thought about 1,100 families in a kitchen that smelled of new beginnings. She thought about Rachel in a job that mattered, and Gerald running a restaurant the right way, and Marcus still in his kitchen, and the plaque on the wall that said what it said. She thought about her mother. You are not serving their ego. You are serving their hunger. She understood now fully and finally what her mother had meant. Not just the literal hunger, all of it. The hunger to be seen, to be treated as though your presence in a room is not a problem to be managed, but a human fact to be honored. The hunger that has nothing to do with food and everything to do with dignity. That was what she had served for 27 years without knowing it had a name. That was what the plaque was about. That was what all of it, every Tuesday, every cup of coffee, every small decision to hold the line, when it would have been easier and quieter and safer to step aside, had always been about. She picked up her coffee pot and topped off Cole's mug. He looked up. "Thank you," he said. The same words he had said the very first time in the same voice, with the same simple weight. "Always," she said. And she meant it the way she had always meant it, not as a performance and not as a policy, but as the most fundamental and unshakable expression of who she was. Some people spend their whole lives looking for the moment that defines them, the grand gesture, the dramatic choice, the scene where they finally become who they were meant to be. Evelyn Parker had spent 27 years learning that there is no single moment. There is only the accumulation of small ones, the coffee poured, the seat offered, the menu carried across a room, each one a quiet vote for the kind of world you believe in, cast without fanfare and without guarantee and without any certainty that it will matter, until the day it does. Until the day. One small, ordinary, completely unremarkable act of human decency sets in motion something so much larger than itself that even the person who started it stands in front of the result and cannot fully see where her part of it ends and the rest of the world begins. Evelyn Parker never stopped being a waitress. She just finally got the world to understand what a waitress actually is, someone who shows up every day and asks the only question that has ever mattered: what do you need and how can I help? That is not a small thing. That has never been a small thing. That is, in fact, everything.